Chair, if I may. Yeah.
And if I go wrong really quickly, Sarah, I haven't got it coloured in blue. I've just got it coloured in white because I printed it out and I should have coloured it before I did print it out. But we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm you're live now.
Oh, great. Thanks so much, Mrs. Steed. And good evening, everybody. We're now on camera at North Area Committee. This is a committee meeting that takes place on a regular basis with city councillors and county councillors. I'm Jocelyn Scott, one of the 3 city councillors for West Chesterton, an area that I'm very blessed to represent. I'm the chair of this committee, the North Area Committee, and of course I'd like to welcome you to North Area Committee, and this is taking place, as we all are aware, with our calendars on Thursday the 17th of November, and the time is a little after 6:30 p.m. Now, each councillor who's here and present will introduce her or himself. And fortunately, I have a list in front of me so I can call on councillors alphabetically. So first, Councillor Bird, would you introduce yourself? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bird for East Chesterton and County Councillor for Chesterton.
Thank you. Now, ordinarily, Councillor Sam Carling would be here, one of the 3 West Chesterton City councillors, but he is an apology this evening. So next we've got Councillor Collis.
Thank you, Chair. Alex Collis, City Councillor for Kings Hedges Ward.
Thank you. And Councillor Divkovic. Is she
Hello.
here?
Yes, I'm here. Hi,
Good.
Councillor Dipkovich, and I'm for the Ward Arbury.
Thank you. And Councillor Gorthrop Wood.
Good evening, Jenny Gorthrop Wood, City Councillor of Kings Hedges and Deputy Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McQueen. Carla McQueen. She may be an apology. And then there's me, as I said, I'm Councillor Scott. And then there's Councillor Shield, who is here.
Hello, Councillor Patrick Shield, one of the Arbury councillors.
Thank you. And Councillor Smart.
Good evening. So I'm City Councillor and I'm one of the Kings Hedges councillors.
Thank you. Councillor Swift.
Hello, I'm Richard Swift, Councillor Richard Swift.
You're on mute.
Oh. It's Councillor Richard Swift for West Chesterton, City Councillor for West Chesterton. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Councillor Baiju Titala Barki. Councillor
Hi,
Titala.
I'm Councillor Baiju Titala Varki, known as Councillor Titala. I'm a councillor at East Chesterton. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Titala. And Councillor Titala has let us know that unfortunately he can only be with us a short time this evening. He has another commitment that he must go to. But thank you for being here for the time you can. And then Councillor Todd Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Mike Todd Jones, City Councillor for Arbury Ward.
Thank you. And now we come to our county councillors. And Councillor Bird has already introduced herself for East Chesterton City and Chesterton County. And next we have Councillor Cox-Condren.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Yes, Hilary Cox-Condren, County Councillor for Arbury Ward.
Thank you. And Councillor Gay, Nick Gay. Not sure that he's here, but we've got an interesting configuration of North Area because Councillor Gay represents Market as the county councillor, and there's a little bit of Market ward that comes into into our area, North Area, Magdalen College. Councillor Machini.
Thank you, Chair. Elisa Miskini, County Councillor, King's Hedges.
Miskini, thank you. And then Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Chair. Kathy Ray, County Councillor for Castle.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Councillor Ray. Does anybody know, are there any other apologies? We've recorded Councillor Carling, and I think that Councillor McQueen is an apology as well. No. Right. Then we move to the officers who are here with us today. We have Committee Manager Sarah Steed, who is also the committee advisor, and without whom we would be lost indeed. And our meeting producer is Bors Hartzog. So thank you to them for their work this evening, through the evening. If anybody has any problems hearing any one of us throughout the meeting, please alert us. But if you type in the meeting chat function, then we'll be aware that we're not being heard, because problems can happen with microphones. And now quickly to business matters. At a recent annual meeting of the city councillors, it was agreed that we would continue to run the area committees this way, that is, on by virtual means. And that means that we're not entitled to make decisions, because we can only make decisions as councillors if we're actually meeting in person, which of course we're not doing because we're on this wonderful media mechanism. So we're not going to make any decisions, but we will certainly be discussing local issues. And copies of the agenda can be found on the City Council's website under committee meetings, minutes and agendas. And this meeting is being broadcast live via the Council's website. Public speakers are reminded that by speaking and appearing in this meeting, you are giving consent to being recorded. The meeting is automatically recorded and will be available on the Council's YouTube pages. So there's rather a lot that I'm reading, and we will come to different voices in a moment. What will happen with our agenda items is this. First, the relevant officer or the member of the public will give a brief introduction to their report. Then councillors and members of the public participating in the meeting will be invited to type speak in the chat function. So if you wish to speak, type speak in the chat function. And that means that you'd like to ask a question or make a statement. And the committee manager will check the Democratic Services email inbox also to see if any public questions have been submitted and are appearing in the email Democratic Services box, and the officer will read these questions out if such are received. And also, for the comfort of us all, if at any time during the proceeding somebody would like to have a short break, please indicate. And if we do go on for some time, I think it's a wise thing to do so that we can all be fresh, as they say, when we're discussing our very important issues. Now, on to the agenda. Agenda item 2. Does anybody have an interest that they should declare? I can see no hands raised, so I'm assuming that no one has an interest to declare. And if you do, if it comes up during the course of the meeting that you realise that there's an interest to declare, please let us know. You can put it in the chat and then make the statement. So, agenda item 3.
Chair, sorry. Can I have to disclose an interest. Item 4, policing and safeguarding neighbourhood. I am a defence lawyer.
Right. Thank you so much. Yes, good. Councillor Tataki does excellent work in the courts. Now, what about the notes of the meeting of the 1st of September 2022? We did receive them with the agenda and they are on the website. So if there are any concerns about the minutes, please could members raise them now. I think that there is an amendment that Mrs. Steed will notify us of. That's my recollection.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've had notification from a member of the public that one of their questions wasn't noted in the 1st of September meeting minutes. So I have published this on the meeting web page, and I'm happy to read it out as well if you'd like.
Perhaps if you do read it out, because then the member of the public would be appreciate that it's again it's on record. Thank you, Mrs. T.
Thanks, Chair. So point number 1, there's been talk locally of the busway from Cambridge North Station no longer stopping along Milton Road, but I decided to try to use it from the Asham Road stop back to the station on the 19th of August. Point 2, the My Bus Trip app no longer shows the B as stopping at Asham Road, but the bus did stop that afternoon. As I got on, I remarked to the driver that I was pleased that the bus had stopped. He told me that this wouldn't be the case for much longer, as from September or October, the busway B would be an express service, not stopping at Milton Road stops. The number 9 Cambridge to Ely would continue to run. Point 3, as far as I could see, this means that the Milton Road stops would lose their connection to Cambridge North Station and would only have 1 bus an hour. The number 9 actually stopping along the road, while the Park and Ride and the busway buses travel along the road but without stopping. Do members of the committee or the representatives of the GCP have anything to say about this, please? The GCP project officer, Histon Road and Milton Road, responded that bus operations were outside of his control as they were controlled by Stagecoach. He would follow up with Stagecoach to get a detailed response, and there was an action for Paul Vanderbilt to follow up with Stagecoach to get a detailed response about bus operations. That's it.
Thanks so much, Mrs. Steed. And I think also that perhaps members of the public and councillors would appreciate it if we did invite a representative from Stagecoach to the next North Area Committee to talk about the buses. But there is very strong, solid work going on to improve the buses for Cambridge and, of course, throughout Cambridgeshire. Now let's move on to item 4, which is policing and safer neighbourhoods. And I'd like to invite Police Sergeant Sean Ems and Senior Community Safety Officer Marianne Crozier to provide an update on the activities in the North area vis-a-vis policing since our last meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's Sergeant Sean Ems here. Just before I start, I can see that Councillor Smart has raised a hand. Do you want to address that before I begin?
Sure. Thanks, Sergeant Ems. Councillor Smart.
Well done, Sergeant Ems. Very observant. So I was just going to say, Councillor Scott, that you talked about Stagecoach there, but with regard to the last item in the minutes, there's an action on there saying about inviting Stagecoach to a meeting. So is that been done already, or is that what you were talking about then? I was a bit confused.
I'm sorry, yes. What I was saying was that we had at that last meeting said that it would be important to invite somebody from Stagecoach. This meeting is rather full in terms of its agenda, but yes, we shall make sure that somebody from Stagecoach comes to the next meeting. But I also wanted to make clear that there's some very solid work going on with the Combined Authority and the Greater Cambridge Partnership in an effort to improve bus services for everybody throughout Cambridge City and Cambridgeshire. So thank you. Thanks, Councillor Smart. And now it's back to Sergeant Sean Ems and to Marianne Crozier. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just say to the committee first off, this is going to be my last area committee meeting with you all. I'm moving on to pastures new as of 5th of December. So I have with me in the room Sergeant Alice Jeffrey, who will be taking over from me. I will ensure that Sarah Steed has Sergeant Jeffrey's details so that she can take the invite on my behalf in the future. Last time, the areas of concern were around street-based drug dealing, ASB, dangerous driving in the north, cycle crime, and youth and knife crime. Of those four, 3 have been concerns for the last 4 years, which suggests that we're perhaps not able to police our way out of it. However, I'll provide you an update on each one. So around street-based drug dealing, which includes cuckooing, local MP teams have carried out multiple warrants at addresses across both the north and the city, with more in the pipeline. We've completed in excess of 60 stop searches, resulting in over 20 arrests, a success rate of approximately 30%, which bucks the national trend, which is considerably lower. We've secured multiple charges for drug supply offences, and we've seized over £160,000 worth of drugs in that time. Whilst clearly it's an ongoing concern for the community living and working in Cambridge, tackling drug dealing and county lines especially remains a force priority for Cambridgeshire Constabulary. There is in fact a dedicated team that tackles county lines across the entire county. In addition, we work closely with housing providers to identify those at risk of being exploited by drug dealers and are otherwise criminally exploited. We have a separate operation around vulnerable people, which I think I mentioned before, by the name of Op Corduroy. We'll continue to scan reports which come into the team, whether they come in via the traditional methods of reporting, 101 or online reports, or those that come directly to the team. And we'll seek to identify persons and locations to direct our resources to, whether that's via enforcement, educational partnership working. I would ask that you encourage your constituents to continue to report any concerns they have to us, whether that be telephone, online, or using the Force website, or they can always do this anonymously through Crime Stoppers. In addition, on the original notes, I have put a link to the CAMS Against County Lines web link, which provides a lot more information and links to resources around county lines. If I move on to ASB and dangerous driving, so we seek to target all vehicle-based antisocial and dangerous driving, and we have a dedicated operation called Op Staple for that. We have local officers who target locations of concern when highlighted by the community, and we've also had the addition of the introduction of the district-wide Safer Speeds team, which has given additional resources available to key target locations. That's predominantly been the Special Constabulary assisting us with that. We continue to carry out patrols in highlighted areas, and also we carry out days of action. The last days of action were June, July, August and September. At the time of writing, we had one on the 27th of October, which was planned. We've obviously since executed that as well. During those days of action, we've issued over 25 tickets to drivers for numerous offences, including mobile phone use, not wearing seatbelts and other vehicle offences. We've seized 5 of those vehicles and made 3 separate arrests. I am also very well aware that there continues to be reports, not just in the north, but across the city around noise issues, particularly noisy motorbike exhausts. We have done a lot of work to investigate how we can tackle this. Sadly, it does involve the offending vehicles to be stopped by police at the roadside, but we no longer have any suitable equipment to carry out roadside testing of noise levels. So whilst some members of the public are very keen to point out to me that there is an agreed decibel limit before vehicles become illegal, sadly I have no way of measuring that to produce evidential noise readings to then successfully prosecute. I am aware that there is a bigger piece of work that is being raised at a higher level than this at the moment, which hopefully will be looking at something more county-wide. I'd also like to remind constituents that they can become part of our community speed watch, and communities themselves can then become involved in making their roads safer in and around Cambridge. Cycle crime was raised during the last meeting. There is, again, a citywide operation to target cycle crime. Cycle crime in the north itself is relatively low when compared to other wards, so it doesn't necessarily have the same degree of action on it. However, the citywide operation, which is known as OPCON, actually has a dedicated police officer to that. They tackle all aspects of cycle crime, but they also tackle not just the offenders and the locations, but they also work in education. There have been cycle marking events that have taken place with organisations such as CamCycle, and these have been taking place at locations that are particularly vulnerable, such as Cycle Point in the city, as well as some of the cycle racks dotted through the city centre itself. I think the notes state that Cambridge Train Station Cycle Park, that more than 100 bicycles were marked at the last event. That is an error. That is my fault. I've got that mixed up. It was in fact 65 that were marked. There was also a noted decrease in cycle thefts at that location, with only one reported during the month of October. We have identified and arrested 2 prolific cycle thieves recently, leading to charges of theft, pedal cycle for both, and successful outcomes at court have led to prison time for both of those offenders. We're continuing to use all available methods to target not just the thieves themselves, but those who take the stolen bicycles in and then move them on. Just having a look through, I understand there is some more work due for the future. There is another cycle marking event later next week, I think it is, and there are some patrols due tomorrow to target some potential cycle thieves in the area of the city centre. If anyone's got any further questions on that, I can direct them to the dedicated officer, who will be PC Tyndall. Youth and knife crime. So in an effort to tackle youth and knife crime in the city, and particularly in the north, we have an operation called Op Guardian. Although Op Guardian is a citywide policing plan to tackle knife crime in Cambridge City, we have done the majority of the work in the north at the moment. Through working with schools, youth services and other partner agencies, we seek to identify offenders and potential offenders. We then grade each of those into significant, moderate or emerging risk categories. And then there is an engagement plan with each of those risk categories that becomes more intrusive the further up the risk they go. Results of this are anecdotal so far, but some of the individuals that we have originally invested time in are now removed from our lists as being of concern. Conversely, others have been highlighted and have been reintroduced or even upgraded. We currently have 2 significant nominals and 3 moderate nominals living in the north, and work is ongoing around them. So we do not only visits to them, but we do patrols in the areas that they live and the areas they're known to hang out in. And one of those has been arrested. He was arrested just over a week ago, actually out of county, but still carrying a knife. And I think one of the others is currently going through some ongoing investigations. So we will continue to work to try and reduce that risk to both the people, the individuals carrying the knives and the wider members of the public. That is my part done for now. Would you like Marianne to do her bit, or would you like to ask me some questions?
Why don't we have, there is a question for two members of the public, actually. We've got Alex Welby and we have Ruth Yule. And Mrs. Yule, if you had something that you wanted to add after Mr. Welby spoke, and then please do, but if you think that he's covered the issue sufficiently, then we'll move on. So, Mr. Welby, would you like to ask your question?
Hello, thank you very much, Councillor Scott. I'm talking about what I would call the second wave of delivery drivers who've arrived in the city. I would say the first wave were on the illegal electric mopeds, and we're well familiar with them. There's a new generation, I call them, who are on petrol mopeds. And I can't help but notice that almost all of them have learner plates. Do we have any evidence that they are receiving instruction, that they're booked in for tests, that they are legally driving the size of moped that they're driving on learner plates? And what's the situation regarding their insurance? And my second question about them is, and this does include what I would call the first wave of drivers, is that they've appeared in very large numbers in the last 12 to 18 months. And I wonder if I'm the only person who has concerns about human trafficking and modern slavery. Thank you very much.
Right. So did you have something you'd like to add to that, Mrs. Yule, or will we go to Sergeant Ems?
Yes, my question was a slightly different take. What are the police doing to make the pavements safe for pedestrians? We suffer from cyclists and scooter riders who seem to treat any horizontal surface as a permitted passageway. I was nearly knocked over walking out of Water Lane onto Chesterton High Street by a bicycle coming round the corner. Luckily, he did manage to stop before he hit me, but it was a close run thing.
Good. Thank you both. And yes, over to you, Sergeant Ems. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's pretty broad in terms of the first question. So, in regards to petrol-driven mopeds or petrol-derived mopeds and delivery drivers, I'll be honest, I can't answer the question, is there any evidence they're receiving instruction or booked in for tests? That is down to the individual riders to ensure that they've had suitable instruction and have taken their CBTs. The only way I can find that out is to stop them and check their details. So I can't answer the question whether they've had any instruction, and I certainly am unable to tell you if they've got any tests booked. That's not information I have access to without speaking to the individual rider. So I can't help you with that. Unfortunately, regarding their insurance, it's going to be the same. It's like every road user. The onus is on the road user of the user of a motor vehicle on a road to have adequate insurance. The only way I'm really able to check that is to stop the rider or driver at the time on a road where I then have the power to check their documentation. So, if I see somebody driving past, I'm not going to know. We do have automatic number plate recognition cameras around the city. We do have access to some of those within police vehicles. Sometimes that will have an alert on it to tell us that a particular vehicle doesn't have insurance, or maybe doesn't even have an adequate license. But the only way that is going to then notify us is if they hit that relevant camera. So the very short answer to that question is I need to stop them to find all that information out. I think that answers it. To move on to the second point around that, the fact that they've appeared in large numbers, again, I've got no documentation, I've got no information that would tell me how many delivery drivers there are in the city. I don't even know if they have to be regulated or recorded. And I've not had any concerns about human trafficking or modern slavery brought to my attention. So that's not to say that they haven't been raised, it's just not something that's come to my attention. So I'm afraid I can't give you an answer to that at all. Is that all right, Mr. Welby? Does that sort of give you an answer? I appreciate it's probably not an answer you wanted.
May I reply, Councillor Scott? if these I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure how to address it. Is it Officer Ems?
Sergeant. It's Sergeant.
Sergeant. Sorry, Sergeant Ems.
Yeah, that's all right. That's fine.
If a number of us in the community are concerned about the way these people are behaving, could we perhaps stop them? In the same way, I know manpower is a terrible problem. Sorry, staffing is a terrible problem. But I know in the past, with, for instance, antisocial cycling, an officer would take a stand in the street and stop people and give out tickets for people not having lights. So would it be possible to depute an officer to stop some of these riders and do some checks so that you and the council could get some idea about whether these people are doing what they ought to be doing? Because I can't help but have a feeling that they're just slapping L plates on and riding perhaps indefinitely without ever taking any sort of test.
Yep. So please don't stop them. You have no legal power to do so, and you're potentially going to put yourself and the rider at risk of harm. So please don't stop them. It may be more useful if you take a look at the speed awareness team or the safer roads teams and become involved in something like a speed watch group. Then you would have access to equipment which could potentially record the vehicles in question, predominantly be around speeding, but then that would involve capturing their details through the camera alone. You wouldn't have to interact with them yourself, and then letters could be sent to the relevant driver, rider or owner of the vehicle. But yeah, please don't put yourself in any harm. Do not attempt to stop any of these vehicles. Like I say, you have no legal power to do so, and should you become injured or even they become injured, there's going to be a whole issue around whose responsibility that is and who's going to be liable for any injuries or damage.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then to Mrs. Yule's question about the footpaths.
Yep. In terms of what are the police doing to make pavements safe, I'm not really sure how to answer that. That's going to be a highways issue. I note that across the city there are an awful lot of cycle lanes cropping up and road widths being reduced through bollards, which is going to, hopefully, I'm sure the intention is that it will encourage cyclists and scooter users to use those lanes rather than be on the pavement. But in terms of them riding on the pavement, so where they are the officially rented scooters, the orange scooters, police officers do have the ability to record the registration number of them. Each of them has a unique 4-digit or 4-letter registration. And then neighbourhood officers all have an app on their phone that they can report any transgressions direct to Voi. So, for example, one of their rented scooters riding on the pavement or going through a red light or being ridden with 2 people on it, we can report that to Voi. And because the rental requires a driving licence to open an account, we send those details through to Voi and they can suspend the account. My record for that is an account suspended within 20 minutes. And because it works off the driving licence, it means that they can no longer rent those scooters. So where you've got the Voi scooters, for example, we can do things without even needing to stop them. Where it's the private scooters, we actually have to physically get them stopped to be able to do anything with them. And then it comes down to sort of officer discretion on how that's dealt with, whether it's words of advice, some education, or maybe a more punitive measure such as a ticket. That's pretty much all we can do, but it generally relies on us seeing the offence in the first place and being able to actually stop the rider. Go on, Mrs. Yule, you've got your hand up.
What about ordinary bicycles? I think the legal scooters are the least of our problems. It's the way ordinary bicycles seem to take the pavements over. And I do know the difference between dual use and single use, but unfortunately some riders don't. Is it a matter for the police to enforce? And could they please think about doing something? Because it really does not feel safe to walk.
So again, and it's the same with the vehicles. Unfortunately, the road traffic laws the powers that the police officers have to deal with the majority of road traffic laws require the police officer to actually witness the offence. Now, at the risk of sounding dismissive, and that's not what I'm going to be doing, where officers are out and about, the chances are if you see a police officer when somebody is riding their pedal cycle on the pavement, that police officer is probably on their way to something that is at greater risk of harm. So whilst they can stop that cyclist, it's going to be up to their discretion, because if they're going to a job where, you know, I don't know, it's a domestic, for example, or it's a missing child, then that's going to remain their priority, I would imagine. Where they are maybe coming back in, or they have got some paperwork that they're going to finish off or something like that, and it's something where there is no more pressing risk, then yeah, it'll be for that officer to decide whether to deal with it or not. But they have to see the offence for them to be able to do anything.
It's so common that it might be worth standing in one of the more frequented parts of the town, just catching people. To my great annoyance, a few years ago, there were police officers stopping cyclists for not having lights. And I asked them, are you stopping them if they're riding on the pavement? Only if they haven't got lights. I wish I had told them then that they jolly well ought to stop them from riding on the pavement, full stop.
I appreciate your frustrations. Events like the, tickets or lights events that we do, we actually have to resource that. We have to find the officers to resource events like that. And where, if they said, we're only going to stop them if they don't have lights, I'll be brutally honest, we would probably prefer them to occasionally ride without lights on the pavement and ride on the road, because it's going to be safer for them. I appreciate it raises a risk for pedestrians.
Yes.
Absolutely. But cyclists are amongst the most vulnerable people within the city through vehicles.
Pedestrians one step lower on the food chain.
Yep.
We are at more risk than cyclists. And Greater Cambridge Partnership, take note when you start encouraging more cycling, please.
Good. Thanks so much. We appreciate that exchange, and all of us, of course, are pedestrians at one time or another in various ways, whether we're pedestrian. Anyway, we fulfill all categories, don't we, in some way or another, whether as pedestrians, whether as wheelchair users on footpaths, and then some of us on cycles. So we can appreciate it from various points of view. But look, let's move on, if we may, to Councillor Bird, then Councillor Shield and Councillor Tatala, and then we'll come back to Sergeant Ems, and then we'll have Councillors Mike Todd-Jones and Swift, and back to Sergeant Ems, and then, if we may, have a report from our Senior Community Safety Officer, Marianne Crozier. So, over to you, Councillor Bird.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Sergeant Ems, for your report. Very interesting. I've got a couple of things I'd like to have a word with you about. First of all, the item about the noisy motorbikes and illegal car exhausts. I understand you haven't got the equipment on you, but can these vehicles not be seized from them until this work is carried out? That way, they would have to get their vehicles repaired. So the exhaust, because I would say that every councillor in Cambridge has had reports about noisy motorbikes and vehicles. So that's one of my questions to you. And my other one is on the cyclists part of it, with the burglaries and stuff. I've noticed a lot of more reports on social media where people are coming into people's gardens in the early hours of the mornings and taking bicycles. I don't know if there's a task group watching out for this sort of thing. It's a bit worrying when you've got your back gate locked and they still manage to get in and take your bikes. So I didn't know if you'd had many reports on this as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bird. Now over to you, Councillor Shield.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sergeant Ems, for your report. Very helpful. I've got two questions, one bike related, one knife crime related. On the bike theft issue, are you getting the sense that this theft is structured and or systematic theft, or is it opportunistic and haphazard? But if it's the former, if it is a structured, systematic theft, are you able to get any footholds or handholds in terms of the business that might be behind this bike theft? That's my bike question. And the knife crime question is, you've helpfully explained that your categories are significant, moderate and emergent in terms of risk of offending, and you've also put that the youth offending services are doing their best to try and dissuade subjects away from carrying knives. And my question, Sergeant Ems, would be, obviously I hope those attempts are successful, and I hope that the young people are seeing reason and are responding well to that soft power approach. But if there are cases where those attempts to dissuade are not quite successful or only half successful, what powers do you have to come down a bit firmer to try and make sure that these young people are not putting themselves and others at risk by carrying knives? Thank you, Sergeant Ems.
Thanks, Councillor Shield. And now to Councillor Tatala.
Thank you, Sergeant Ems, for your report. See, I have two, in fact, one question with two kind of limbs. Cycle theft. You have mentioned that, we have either you can report online or even you can call 101. But to be honest, my experience with 101 is not that promising. In terms of reporting matters online, I myself have reported someone was broken into my shed and took my bike away. And I have reported this, and I have sent them the recorded video of this alleged offense taking place. But it has 3-4 weeks. Interestingly enough, I had to write a few emails to some of the officers where they were in a rush to close the file. Then I had to challenge it because of my professional expertise on this. I did challenge. And since then they have to reopen. And then they said someone will contact me. Nothing has happened so far. So my concern is this. If it is simple theft, cycle theft, I don't think you will be able to do anything if the offense is in past for 6 months, if it is summary only offense. But now I think it's almost a month, at least couple of months have gone past now. Now, what is the time frame if we were to report something online where police would do something? And this is, I'm just giving you my own experience, my own example, what happened to me. And when will we get some sort of response? And why public should just simply, appealing or opposing the immediate action of closing the files? And this is I hope you got my concerns. And if this is if I am facing this, and I think this would be the case all around. And what is the time frame where you would just give some response to the local residents or the victims? And I think you have to, like put your socks up when it comes to 101. My experience, the officers are reluctant even to entertain you over the phone.
Councillor Tatala, sorry, I mean, it very much sounds like you wish to complain about the way that your crime's been investigated. I'm more than happy to take that with you outside of this. It doesn't seem like this is the place to do that.
No, it is not my particular complaint. This is something which I have experienced. I'm raising my concerns here through the North Area Committee. I think it is immaterial whether it is my personal issue or not. It is an issue which taken place in my ward.
I think, Councillor Eames, it's really about the time frame, that if there's a limitation period on a crime, then if it's not investigated within the limitation period and action's not taken, then that's the end of it, isn't it? I think that this was the gist of Councillor Tatala. But over to you then, Sergeant Eames, for those three councillors' issues raised with you.
All right, thank you. So I'll try and work my way through. So in regards to the noisy vehicles, can we seize them until they get fixed? No. The reason we can't do that is because we can't prove that they're illegal in the first place. Because as I've said, we don't have the measuring equipment suitable to do that. And I've then got no power to remove it because I've got no proof that an offence has been committed. And in short, the reason we would normally seize a vehicle would be around no insurance or licence issues with the driver. So I'm afraid I can't do that. Where I can prove somehow that if the exhaust's got a hole in it, for example, and that's visible, and I can say the noise is coming from a hole in the exhaust, then I can issue. It's not a ticket, but I can issue something called a vehicle defect rectification scheme note. And the idea of that is it's given to the driver. The driver then goes away, makes the necessary repair, and comes back to the police station within 14 days to prove that they've repaired that defect. So that's about all I can do with that. Bikes and burglary. We have a dedicated acquisitive crime team who deal with burglaries, residential and occasional non-residential burglaries. I'd have to speak to them. I don't know if there's any increase on bicycles being stolen during these events or not. I can't answer that, I'm afraid. It's not information that I have. Bicycle thefts, are they sporadic? Are they, spur of the moment, or are they organised? Really good question, Councillor Shield. I think that potentially it's a mixture of both. So where we have members of the community who have perhaps substance abuse issues, they are highly likely to steal an easily available bicycle. They will take that somewhere. They will receive as much money as they require, which is normally an incredibly low amount, to go off and purchase whatever they need to purchase. I have no evidence that there is anything more organised, but I think there are suspicions that potentially, we get a visit from a vehicle, they load up and they go. But again, I've got no proof of that. It certainly seems a not unlikely scenario for some of the bicycle thefts we suffer. Knife crime, where we have the educational approach, if that perhaps doesn't work, do we take other action? Yes. Yeah, we send people to court all the time. We send them to court. There is a process that works with all individuals. We start low, we try to deal with things out of court. Once we've got to a certain stage, they lose the ability to have an out of court disposal, and then we go to the courts, taking whatever measure the court sees fit. So we are sometimes disappointed by the court's decisions, but yes, we do send people to court. At the very extreme end of it, none of you will have failed to have seen the two young men who were recently imprisoned for a total of 48 years for the event that happened in the Market Square last year. So, I mean, that is the far extreme at one end, and then we will do whatever we can before we get to that, but obviously where it is appropriate, courts every time. Councillor Fatala, I think what your basic complaint is it sounds like you're reporting cycle theft and they are being closed very early on, perhaps without full investigations. We are aware that there is sometimes an issue with the way these things are reported. Sorry, not the way they're reported, the way they're recorded by our demand hub, and that our demand hub do not always allocate these investigations when perhaps there are suitable lines of inquiry. It is a known issue. Inspector McNeil from the Cambridge City Neighbourhood Team is trying his hardest to prevent these crimes being filed early on. It's a piece of work that's ongoing. We are aware it's an issue. Where we're able to, we are trying to educate them, and we're trying to make sure that things like where there is CCTV that's available, that gets allocated rather than just filed with a note that says filed until CCTV is received. We have had some success, but it does rely on neighbourhood officers doing a lot of that scanning, which is an additional workload for them that should have already been dealt with through the demand hub. So we're aware that that is a problem. We are working on it. And I think that's where we got to.
Good. Thanks so much, Sergeant Eames. And I really apologise to Councillors Mike Todd-Jones and Richard Swift, because I think because Councillor Divkovic's come on also with a question. So why don't we go to the Senior Community Safety Officer, Marianne Crozier, and could we have your report, please, Marianne, or Ms Crozier, and then we'll come to Councillors Todd-Jones, Swift and Divkovic, and any other questions that arise out of your report, Ms Crozier. So over to you.
Of course, no problem. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marianne Crozier. I'm Senior Community Safety Officer here at the City Council. I won't keep you too long because a lot of what's included in our report you'll have had a chance to read, but just really to kind of highlight a couple of things. My team, we work across the city where we look at complaints of antisocial behaviour and we take appropriate enforcement action, but like Sean said, you know, we always start from a point of kind of support and lower end remedies that we can use to prevent nuisance behaviour from continuing. Since the last meeting, it was the last reporting period, sorry, we've been involved with looking at cases around seeking injunction against someone who we believe to be exploiting, taking financial advantage of vulnerable individuals in the north of the city, and we're prepping together, putting together information to take forward an injunction at the moment. And we work really closely with the members of the police and colleagues in other support agencies when we're putting together this information. We've been working and holding weekly surgeries last month around in Arbury Court Library around concerns around youth nuisance behaviour there, and there hasn't been many reports since. We're really pleased at how that's been going, and we've been sort of offering support to the community there as well. Just really, I suppose, from me, a plea to just, you know, encourage your residents and your constituents to report nuisance behaviour if they're experiencing it. We always say we're really happy to have a conversation with anyone if they call in, and even if we're not the right team to be dealing with it, for example, if it was just straight noise nuisance, for example, we can always put someone in touch with the right teams. We appreciate it can be quite difficult calling the council sometimes and getting through to the right department, but we're always happy to be that conduit to triage nuisance behaviour and antisocial behaviour. And I would like to sort of put a focus really. We've recently started holding what we're calling peer groups and places meetings. They are meetings where we're looking at issues around, so young people have come to our attention around nuisance behaviour, but we're looking at it from a contextual safeguarding point of view, and this is kind of safeguarding, we all know, is kind of potential issues for a young person within their home, within the family, but contextual safeguarding is looking at all of those other external factors that might come into play for a young person, you know, when they're in school, when they're in the community and things like that. So we're trying to look at it from that point of view to make areas safer for young people to be, but also to kind of to discuss concerns around particular areas or particular young people. And I'm really pleased to say that since those meetings have been held, they're really well attended by colleagues from education, from police, housing associations, social care. And we've had some really positive inputs, I think, and sort of outcomes for some of the young people whose names have been mentioned. So I hope that's a little roundup of what we've been doing.
Thanks so much, Ms. Crozier. Thank you. And so now over to Councillors Todd Jones, then Councillor Swift and Councillor Divkovic, and then back to Sergeant Ems and or Ms. Crozier. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sergeant Ems, thanks for your report. I'm sorry to hear you're moving on, but thanks for all your reports to North Area Committee since you've been with us. Can I just bring up an item which is actually probably as relevant to Marianne Crozier, because it's under the section report for the City Council, the Community Safety Team kind of section. And that's an issue which has actually been going on, it's kind of going on and off for quite a while, and that is antisocial behaviour, and I think some quite intimidating behaviour around the Carlton Way shop, specifically the one-stop shop, the ATM and the access to Carlton Terrace, which is close by. There have been some specific reports to the police, which I know you're aware of, Sergeant Ems, relating to some criminal incidents in the area. But the kind of ongoing behaviour, which I witnessed myself, and I think it is quite intimidating and quite difficult sometimes for local people accessing the shops. It has been around for some time, and I don't know, Marianne, if you can comment any further about whether the City Council community safety team should be putting something more specific into place to kind of monitor what's going on in this area. But I'll be grateful to hear your comments. Thanks.
Thank you. And now over to Councillor Swift.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Sergeant Ems and Sergeant Crozier. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. I would just like to ask about the electric bicycles and for about the last 6 months or so since the summer. There's been a lot of electric bicycles without any number plates, and the drivers wear masks and dark glasses and helmets. So it's completely impossible to see who they are from facial recognition. And I just wondered if there's any evidence that they are county lines, etc. I shouldn't think there's much you can do about it from what you've already said, but it'd be just interesting to hear if you've got any evidence that you think why people are wearing, even in a heat wave, thick scarves and dark glasses and helmets on electric bicycles without number plates. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Divkovic.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sergeant Ems. My question is about the amount of money that was seized in drugs. Is that just the 160,000? Is that just in the North area? And what are the greatest challenges or the main challenges that you have as a police force to tackle drug crime in the North area?
Thank you. So perhaps we go to Marianne Crozier first to respond to Councillor Todd Jones, and then back to Sergeant Ems.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Councillor Todd Jones. It's something, obviously, I think one of my colleagues has spoken to you or contacted you in the past day or so, and it's something we'll be looking at as a case and investigating exactly, trying to get to the bottom of what is happening. So there had been issues previously, I know, and there'd been some work undertaken outside of the shops and outside, and sort of looking at that wall particularly. But these are the first kind of complaints we've had of this nature for some time. So obviously we're really concerned as to how it's starting up again. So if it's something, we'll obviously be working with the police. We've got the problem solving group on Monday, which we're going to raise there, so we can get that kind of feedback from sort of a multi-agency approach, and to see how we can get involved to, and what remedies we need to use to kind of prevent this from continuing. So we will feed back to you as we do in regards to this case, if that's okay.
Thank you. Good. And so now to you,
thanks so much,
Sergeant Ems. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I've just had a quick look regarding the one stop. We've had nothing reported to us since September. So I've got no intelligence, I've got no incidents reported, I've got no crimes recorded since September of this year. However, I do know that it has been an issue in the past, and obviously the update from Marianne, that will get brought up at a problem solving group meeting where we can sit down, we can actually have a proper look at it, and hopefully we can come up with a a plan between us to try and alleviate any of the issues that are there. Electric cycles with no number plates, they don't require number plates. The numbers that you see at the back of some of them are just references, I think, for the individual vehicle itself. They're not number plates as we would know them, that we would see on a motorbike or a motor car, because they don't require them. They don't require separate insurance. They don't require road tax. They don't require MOTs or things like that. So that's why you see some of them do have them, some of them don't, but they're not of any value as such in terms of roads policing. And as to the choice of attire of the riders, I can't answer that, I'm afraid. I would guess that it's potentially colder riding one of those things. If you imagine it's not like a bicycle, you've got no physical input into them, so just sitting still and travelling along at 15 miles an hour or whatever is probably going to get a little bit chilly, particularly at this time of year, and where people have got their faces covered by scarves. Again, I would guess that's potentially for their own health, some sort of filter to road traffic emissions. Certainly, if I was riding a bicycle all day, I would want something covering my face to try and reduce whatever particulates are floating around in the air coming into my lungs. And then finally, around the money seized, no, that wasn't one seizure, and it wasn't just in the north. That was across the city from recollection, and it was across multiple incidents and investigations. It was just that was the running total at that time. In regards to the greatest challenge of tackling drug dealing in the north, you'll be unsurprised to know that probably a lack of resources at present. So when I took over the north team nearly 4 years ago, I had 8 PCs and 3 PCSOs. I currently have 4 PCs. There is only so much I can do with those 4 PCs when I'm trying to tackle cycle crime, antisocial behaviour, driving offences, knife crime. So in and around all the other things we do, because we also get used to cover response incidents where there are not enough response officers to cover them. We also get called on all sorts of various other tasks within the police to do because people think we're the right people to do it. As well as all our crime investigations, we hold huge numbers of crimes that we're investigating as well. For the north of Cambridge that perhaps in the past other departments would have dealt with, but now we deal with them as well. So I would say resources or lack of is probably the biggest challenge we face, but also a lack of reporting from residents. We struggle. So, for example, in terms of warrants, we forever get people telling us, there's a house down so-and-so road and you've done nothing about it. And when I go and have a look, we've had no reports about it. If people don't tell us about things, we're not going to do anything because we don't know. So if I can just again reiterate, if you've got issues or your constituents have got issues, please get them to report it by whatever means. If they don't, I can guarantee I won't do anything. If they do, I can't guarantee I'll do something immediately, but at least there will be a record of it and I can start building that picture so that when I get to a point where I've got enough, I can then go and get a warrant or I can direct my resources because it will become a priority over something else. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant Ems. And we've got 2 more councillors with questions. And then after we've heard from Councillors Cox and Todd Jones, we'll come back to Sergeant Ems and Ms Crozier, and then we'll end this part of the agenda and move on to the next item, which is the Greater Cambridge Partnership Making Connections consultation. So first Councillor Cox-Condren, then Councillor Todd Jones, then Sergeant Ems and Ms Crozier, and then to the Making Connections.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sergeant Ems, adding thanks and goodbye. I just wanted to also thank Councillor Todd Jones for raising the issue. We've been discussing that around the shops, the one-stop shop, and I just wanted to add to that. Last week I was with the Arbury School primary school Council, and that was one of the issues around going around that area that the children, you know, that was they felt very unsafe there. So I don't know, Marion, if that could perhaps add into some, you know, that could continue some of the work around the shop there as well, and the space, the places where the children feel safe. And sort of along those themes too, and Sergeant Ems, I know that we've spoken about this before about trying to set up a school street at the back of Arbury School on Rowland Close, and maybe sometimes having some parking enforcement in that area, which is quite dangerous for the children coming out the back there as well, and some of the issues around there. So just sort of continuing to raise that safety issue, really. Thank you.
Councillor Todd Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just to follow up, Sergeant Ems, about the reporting or lack of in terms of incidents around the Carlton Way shops and Carlton Terrace. I mean, I'm aware, and it's quite recent, of at least 3 incident numbers that the police have provided in terms of criminal break-ins to the sheds around the Carlton Way shops and the Carlton Terrace area. And presumably those will get investigated, and I'm not saying it's related to the more general antisocial behaviour that we've been referring to, but it may be, and I do think the police ought to be liaising closely with our community safety team and ensuring that all these issues are tackled properly.
Right. Sergeant Ems, Ms. Crozier.
Yeah, I can go.
Oh, go on, you do.
You sure? Right.
Yeah, that's fine.
Councillor Cox-Condren, thank you. Regarding schools and the parking and the issues around that, if we can be notified about that, I can try and look into it. Obviously, parking issues as such, parking offences are decriminalised in Cambridge, and they're not actually a police matter. That's controlled by the council, I think the county. But you know, if it is a real problem, then the school should be making efforts to speak to their parents or whoever about the parking. And then if that's still not resolving the issues, then if you know, information comes to us or messages come to the North team, then we can look at potentially coming out and seeing what we can do. I can't guarantee it because again, it'll be competing demands. But
absolutely,
yeah, if we don't know.
Thank you. Yeah, I did. One of your officers did come out actually last year and said that he'd try and patrol actually, and I can't remember his name now, so I'll follow that up as well. Thank you.
No problem. Was that PC Payne by any chance?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Regretfully, he no longer works for the organisation. So,
but okay.
I can pass that on to the rest of the team.
That's why we haven't found him. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks.
So, all questions asked and answered.
Sorry, I think Councillor Todd Jones wanted an update around the burglary sheds. Is that right? And
of course. Sorry.
Around Carlton Way. Yeah. I was copied into an email. You are absolutely correct. There were further incidents that have been reported to us. They don't appear to have generated. They should have generated a crime. What I've done is I've just looked up One Stop, so I've not looked up the addresses around. But I know that Inspector McNeil has responded to an email. I don't know if you were copied into that. We had an email in about it that I think originally the complainant copied you into, which was sent to Mr. Gallop. And I know Inspector McNeil has provided a response to that. It may be that he's not provided it to you, but I know the original informant has had the response, as has Mr. Zeichner. I can ask Mr. McNeil to send it to you as well if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be helpful, Sean. I haven't received. I wasn't copied in, so thanks.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. I will get him to send that to you as well.
Good. Right. Well, thank you so much. First of all, thank you, Marianne Crozier, and we look forward to having you back to North Area Committee in the future when it's the next report from the police to our committee. And we all must say thank you to Sergeant Ems for the reports that you've given to North Area Committee over the time you've been representing police in this area, and to all the work that's been done by you and by your team. We do appreciate that very much, as do all the residents, of course. And we wish you well in your next adventure. Hope that you're remaining in Cambridge or Cambridgeshire. And then also we look forward to welcoming Sergeant Jeffries, and thank you for putting her contact details in the chat so that we know whom we should be in touch with for the future. So thank you very much for both your reports.
Thank
and
you
now,
all.
Good.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And now we move, as I said, to agenda item 5 and welcome Rachel Stoppard, Peter Blake, Lynn Miles and Mem Ahmet from the Greater Cambridge Partnership to report to us on Making Connections consultation. So would the officers, in the way you wish, introduce this topic so that we can first of all hear from you and then have questions that you will of course answer. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair. You've got me this evening, Lynn Miles from the Greater Cambridge Partnership.
Oh, right.
I'm newly in post at the Greater Cambridge Partnership and the Programme Director for City Access. I'm really delighted to have a chance to address you all this evening. Chair, I've got a presentation, but I'm a little bit mindful of time. Would you like me to run through the presentation, or would you prefer me to give a short verbal summary and leave more time for questions?
Perhaps if you do give a short verbal summary, and then we'll have questions, and if we may have the presentation that we could put, I think we'd be able to put it up on the website or at least circulate it to the councillors, and then if there are any members of the public who want to receive the copy, I'm sure that we can organise that. And thank you for being mindful of the time. Thank you.
No problem at all, and I'm certainly happy to circulate the slides afterwards. Committee, I've come to just update you on the consultation that's currently live, running from the Greater Cambridge Partnership on Making Connections. The context for this consultation at the moment is a sort of background of tackling Greater Cambridge's urgent issues around how we travel into and around the city, tackling congestion, clogging up the roads, but also really importantly tackling sort of carbon emissions and air quality, which leads to 121 estimated attributable deaths from air pollution in 2020. We also know there are thousands of people living and working in Greater Cambridge that currently have no good alternative to travelling by car, and a large number of people currently in transport poverty without alternatives. This isn't the sum total of the Greater Cambridge Partnership's work in this area, but I will focus in on what we're doing today. So, but also in the wider programme, you will be aware, I expect, of new busway schemes, extra park and ride, travel hub spaces, cycling greenways, cross-city cycle routes, Histon and Milton Road, and so forth. But the focus of this consultation is on what we're calling Making Connections. This does come after quite a long series of consultations over several years, which have sort of layered up the evidence and people's opinions on how to tackle the issue of congestion in Greater Cambridge. There have been engagement exercises in 2018 and 2019 around people's perception of the problem, how it needed to change, and the types of solutions they wanted to see. There was also a citizens' assembly in 2019 that had a representative group of people for a couple of weekends in the autumn, about 3 years ago now, workshopping through these sort of knotty, what the policy experts called sort of wicked problems, where there are sort of multiple overlapping objectives and not easy answers. And overall, that's sort of driving us towards a message from people that they want affordable, clean, practical transport solutions that offer them a viable alternative to car use. Most people do agree that something needs to be done to reduce or discourage car use. And at the most recent consultation before this one in autumn of last year, about 2,500 Greater Cambridge residents responded to a sort of taking the temperature and parameters of this. And in particular, 71% of them supported overall aims, 68% 86% of them back the idea of trying to reduce traffic, not only to improve bus services, but also to improve walking and cycling options in the environment. And when tested on the types of solutions they wanted to see, there was in general a preference for some sort of charging or road user pricing over instead of additional or new parking charges. And so the proposal that is currently out to consultation is a specific scheme. Having spent several years layering up the sort of in principle, we're now out to consultation on a scheme which has 3 key elements. And the first is transforming the bus network from as early as mid-2023, depending on decision timescales, with more services to more locations, longer operating hours, cheaper fares, capped at £1 within the city for a hopper fare, or £2 for travelling into the city, and a daily cap. Alongside that bus network, more investment in new sustainable travel schemes, so better walking and cycling links into and across the city. And the third element then is a sustainable travel zone, which is the means of delivering the first 2 elements, in which within a cordon you pay to drive if you choose to drive. And the revenue from that zone will be ring-fenced legally for transport improvements. And there's a range of potential discounts, exemptions and reimbursements sort of set out in the consultation material, because we recognise that there are some people who it wouldn't be fair or appropriate to charge in that way, so including those on the lowest incomes and blue badge holders and carers and so forth. I can go into more detail on that. So there's details set out in the consultation of the bus network improvements across the city and into the city. And there's detail on sort of how this zone is set out. And I'm happy to sort of take questions on any of the detail of that. Very broadly, the zone set out covers the urban boundary of the city, and it's quite loosely defined by the ring of park and rides around the city, in fact. So none of the park and rides would be in the chargeable zone. And so people coming from the outside, if they are not in an area where there's significantly improved bus services, although many will have significant improvements, everyone has the opportunity to sort of drive as far as the park and rides and then carry on their journey by bus and not be charged. We expect the impact of this to reduce car trips in the city by 50% in the peak. It should yield around 50 million or perhaps more, depending on sensitivity tests, each year to invest in better, cleaner and safer transport after costs. And we're forecasting a 40% increase in public transport usage. And of course, it sort of funds that wider measures to enhance mobility and connections. The proposed charge is £5 for cars, £10 for sort of vans and minibus sized vehicles, and £50 for coaches and HGVs. And then I discussed various exemptions proposed for various groups of people, including low income, and potentially working with the NHS Trust to define a scheme that will give targeted exemptions, for example, to clinically vulnerable people who will need to travel to appointments by car, and a means of reimbursing people's accounts for trips to A&E and so forth. The timeline for this would be that the consultation that's currently live ends in December this year. There's a period for reflection and deliberation on the way forward after that. If a decision by Cambridgeshire County Council of the Highways Authority is taken in the middle of next year, improvements could start to be seen by the end of next year to the bus service. And there's a firm commitment that between now and sort of 25, 26, 27, when the charge phase is in, those bus service improvements would ramp up. And the ability to do this is that we have this sort of one-off set of money from the city deal, which can front fund those improvements, and then when the charge fully comes in, it will generate the revenue to carry them on so that there isn't a cliff edge for that. I'll circulate the details and I'll pop the link in the chat for the consultation website. There's a huge amount more detail and information on that. Please, of course, encourage your constituents to have their say. I know there are strong views on this in all directions. We're doing lots of in-person events, we're doing lots of online events, and there's a lot of detail on the website, and we're trying to engage on social media and through things like leaflet drops. So that's the headlines, and I'm happy to take questions.
Good. Thanks so much. Very much appreciated, Lynn Miles. And there are 3 questions we've got from the public. First from Lillian Rundblad, and if Sarah Steed, Mrs. Steed would read that one, and then we'll have Ruth Yule, and then we'll have Hilary Goy, and then we'll come back to Lynn Miles, and then we'll go on to some further questions that have come in from Councillors Collis and Shield. So, would you mind reading Lillian Rugblad's question, please, Sarah?
Thanks, Chair. Making Connections, the bus service connections in the Making Connections area for Histon and Impington, South Cambridgeshire, referring to the interactive map, page 35. The guided bus A on Histon Road, the B1049, direct to the station in Addenbrooks and stopping at all bus stops has been greatly appreciated since the GCP project was finished late 2021. It was especially noted when in a period in September the buses drove by since they were already full when they arrived at Histon Road in Cambridge and thus did not stop. The A bus has been an essential improvement in the GCP project. In trying to understand the information on the interactive map, page 35, it is difficult to interpret where the various lines for City 8 and the busway service extension from Cottenham are stopping, and if it is on Histon Road. These lines are terminating in the middle of the city centre. However, the most important line for the actual busway A via Orchard Park direct to Addenbrooks and Trumpington Park and Ride does not seem to stop on Histon Road anymore. This is not acceptable for an area where people are hit by the congestion charges if they would ever try to use their car. The direct busway A to Addenbrooks is more than ever needed for many residents, both for appointments and working places. Histon Road Residents Association requests a clarification of the busway A route and a confirmation that the bus will stop at the GCP bus stops along Histon Road in Cambridge. That's it, Chair.
Great. Thank you. And now to you, Ruth. Mrs. Yule.
That's all right. 3 questions, Lynn, if I may. How do you propose to run a vastly improved bus service when Stagecoach doesn't have enough drivers to run the present service? How will you fund the bus service if it's such a success that very few people pay the congestion charge? And a slightly more constructive suggestion, are there any plans to provide secure cycle parking, at least in the centre of town, so that it's possible to leave a bicycle and be sure of finding it again later?
Thank you. Thanks, Ruth Yule. And now to Hilary Goy. You're on mute.
Thank you very much, Lynn Miles, for your comments. I must admit, I find it difficult. The future is the future, and it is always indefinite. We have no guarantees. But I do have one question for you, which you will be able to answer with certainty. How do you get to work?
Right, and that's your question, Hilary.
Yeah, that is my question.
Good, thank you. So it's back to you, Lynn Miles.
Thanks, Chair. I'll take them in turn, if I may, in response to the question received that Mrs. Steed read out. The bus maps shown on the website are intended as schematic to represent the lines in future. Busway services will carry on serving bus stops on Histon Road as they do now. The maps aren't attempting to show every bus stop, so please be assured on that point. There's nothing in there that implies cuts to stops and services. Councillor Yule asked me 3 questions. Firstly, about running the buses and finding the drivers. I completely acknowledge that the bus system nationally is very fragile at the moment. The operating model has been quite compromised. One of the issues is that there are a number of issues that the bus service system nationally is facing. One is that since COVID, whilst car traffic levels have almost recovered, although not fully recovered pre-COVID, bus passenger levels have lagged quite far behind. And that compromises the revenue model for those buses, and it's particularly acute, as you'd expect on rural surfaces and so forth. So that undermines the revenue stream coming into the bus service companies and the sort of the business model for buses. And I think, you know, there is a risk that will continue to get worse as a sort of national trend. And the second point is, of course, that there are labour shortages, which the bus sector is facing, again, nationally. That is a difficult problem. I wouldn't like to pretend that it isn't. There is no expectation that there will be a sort of turning on of the tap of buses, and so sort of suddenly they would all flood in at once. It gives us time to ramp up services and to get the plan in place to recruit and train. The Mayor of Greater Cambridgeshire and Peterborough has committed some of his skills budget to support that recruitment and training as we ramp up. And so there's sort of time for us to address that, but I hope that answers that question. In response to your question about whether anyone will pay, yes, we assume that they will continue to pay. We are, of course, reliant on modelling on this. Modelling draws on various sort of standard parameters about how people respond to the cost of driving, and also on evidence of how people have responded in other cities in other ways, with sensitivity tests around that, because there is an element of uncertainty in modelling. But we assume that enough people will carry on paying that there is a revenue of around 50 million a year after the costs of administering the scheme have been taken off. And in fact, we think it'll be slightly more than that, but have tried to take a sort of cautious approach of sort of planning for about 50 million's worth of investment each year in the network. On secure cycle parking, yes, that is sort of part of what we've built in, but in part the reason the consultation is live now is to ask people to respond to this and sort of say, have we sort of set the right level of ambition for the buses? Are the things we set out right? Would you want more or less on active travel and cycle parking or cycle infrastructure? So this is a consultation, and I meant to say at the beginning, and I hope it's obvious, but in case it isn't, everything I was saying about what will happen or what is proposed or what, you know, what we intend is all sort of entirely dependent on the response to this consultation. So the purpose of this, the requirement from DfT, and the right thing to do, is, having spent several years talking to people in principle about what solutions they want to see, and hearing back from them, well, I like the idea of this, but show me what it might look like. This is that first attempt to do just enough detail to give people a credible and sort of tangible idea of what it might look like. But we haven't worked everything through in so much detail that it's entirely fixed. Quite rightly, we're doing this process now to hear whether people think we've got the balance of those things right. And so everything that I'm saying is sort of subject to consultation, as you would expect. Councillor Goy asked me how I travel to work, and the answer is I drive to Trumpington Park and Ride and get the bus in.
So did you have a comeback on that, Hilary Goy, or you're happy with that?
Not entirely happy with that. I live inside the city. If I am to get to work, I will be charged if I drive to the Park and Ride. How am I expected to get to work?
So the intention is that the charge should come in after a substantial improvement to the bus services and to active travel and so forth. So you ought to have a great deal more options for travelling.
No, I won't actually have a great deal more options, because I live off Milton Road, and I live at least, well, I'm at the very end of a very long road. I'm over 70. So getting me on a bicycle is not going to be possible. And in certain weather conditions, walking to the bottom of the road to the bus stop is equally not going to be possible. I do not know what my mobility is going to be in the next few years. So it doesn't particularly matter to me if there's a bus every 10 minutes, which there won't be if the Park and Ride buses and the others say they want expressways into town, which is why, although we have something like, I would imagine, about 10, if not more, buses an hour running along the Milton Road, there is only one that actually stops, and that is the Ely bus, because all the others, as has been pointed out earlier, are no longer going to stop. So from my point of view, increased buses makes nil difference. Also, they don't actually go where I work.
Good. Now, before you come back on that one, Lynn Miles, why don't we come to Councillors Collis, Shield and Gawthorpe Wood, and then we'll come back to Lynn Miles so that she can reflect on your question, Hilary Goy, and let's have Councillors Collis, Shield, Gawthorpe Wood. And when we finish this part of the agenda, we'll have a short break and then we'll come back to the Environment Improvement Program and then to the residents' contribution on the agenda where we're talking about the Friends of the various libraries. So, Councillor Collis, please, you go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Lynn. Lynn, can you say a bit more about how the reimbursement will work? I represent a ward in the city where there are a lot of people on low incomes, and I'm just not convinced that they can afford to pay charges up front. It's causing a lot of anxiety among people, and I'd like to be able to explain that better to them. Thank you.
Councillor Shield.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lynn. I've got two questions. One is about school buses. We know that the roads are much more congested in term time, and so I'm wondering if the GCP have reached out to the schools with regard to a conversation on school buses and making that part of the mix. That would be for everyone's benefit. School buses is my first question. And my second question, Lynn, is to do with businesses. And it is, has the GCP done any scoping work into the impact of the Making Connections proposals for businesses who depend upon use of their own vehicles to provide a service? And I'm thinking, for example, plumbers and gardeners. They're providing an important service to the community, but there's going to be a big overhead emerging potentially from the new arrangements, and so I'm wondering, could some sort of batch purchasing of driving permits for that class of road user on a kind of season ticket principle be countenanced at all to help those businesses and also the communities they serve? Thank you.
Thank you. And now to Councillor Gawthorpe Wood.
Okay, thank you very much, Lynn, for the presentation. So my questions, again on exemptions, how much wiggle room and how much could these be extended? Because like Councillor Collis, I know that many of my residents have raised fears about this. The second thing is, how much wiggle room is there on the boundaries? And I'm particularly thinking, say, of access to Addenbrooks. I am worried about isolation amongst older people who, like Mrs. Goy, do find it difficult to get to a bus stop. And I did wonder whether or not Ting shared taxi could be introduced in the city. That might help a little bit, but again, it's perhaps the cost that puts off some people. Flexibility of routes, that's a key point, and how much flexibility will there be in the future? Do we really have to rely on Stagecoach? And I wondered if you could say something about franchising in the future. I'm sure I've got a few more questions here. Oh yes, sole traders, self-employed, impact on businesses. And I think it's all right to say this. Alia, I was in Alia last week, and of course they have several places there located. They're social enterprises around the town. They're extremely worried about this, on the effect on their staff who are not on well, they are quite low. They're on low salaries, low wages. Okay, I think that will do for now. Thank you.
Right, Lynn, thank you.
No problem. I'll try to get all of those. Councillor Goy, I hear what you're saying about mobility and distance to bus stops. I would sort of, there are two things I'd say to that. One is that I do think that there's quite a lot of changes to frequencies, stopping patterns and routes around the city. And so you might find the situation is improved for you. I'm not sure specifically where you live. We are aware of people with concerns about older people with sort of mobility issues, and particularly we've been having conversations and focus groups around disabilities that are sort of relapsing, remitting, and don't necessarily sort of qualify you for a blue badge, but may sometimes impact your mobility. So that's a live issue that we're thinking about. With this, as with all the exemptions, I would really flag that what we've done here is sort of do a sort of first pass at what we think this might look like, and we're relying on this consultation for people to flag to us the issues that we may not have considered or where we may need to tweak things. And so I sort of thank you for your feedback, and please encourage others who want to make similar feedback to do so through the consultation, and we will take that on board and present that material to GCP board assembly members and then board members for their consideration. Councillor Collis asked about the reimbursement. We've been talking about it as reimbursement, and as I sort of mentioned earlier, we haven't done sort of full detailed work on the sort of architecture of the scheme yet, as you would expect, because it's not in fact fixed yet. But what I'm envisaging and what I think ought to be possible is that people essentially have an account-based system, and there's some ability to sort of void charges before they happen. So maybe you get a monthly bill or something, and you know, if you've been to the doctor and they can sort of register it and void it off your account. So I think it won't be a case of them paying and then having to wait to have money sent back to them. It'll be more a case of sort of quashing charges onto an account, if that makes sense. We haven't worked through the full detail of that yet because it's not sort of appropriate for us to do that yet, but certainly we don't expect some very burdensome and delayed system, because we recognise that people won't, it's just not efficient to do it that way, and it's not fair. Sorry, let's run down my list. Councillor Shield, school buses. Yes, we're talking to schools. The network has been designed in part to pick up sort of school and college transport in particular, because one of the things we are really conscious of at the moment is that lots of students, particularly of further education, are really struggling to access the opportunities they want at the moment and get buses to college, a lot of them in transport poverty, particularly when not in the city. And so we do want to support children to make choices that work for their lives rather than work for the existing transport network. We're in dialogue with the head teachers around Cambridge, and yes, we are taking that on board. It's an interesting idea on batch purchase for sole traders, particularly tradesmen that need vans, and it's one that we've been discussing with people throughout the consultations. That's a really interesting suggestion. It's helpful to hear you make it as well. As I said, these are the sorts of things that we want to try and pick up through the consultation, so that when we do get to detailed design, we've got these things in mind. Councillor Gawthorpe Wood, a couple of questions on wiggle room, and the answer is there is plenty of wiggle room on this scheme because we're consulting on it now. There is, of course, as you would expect, there's a trade-off, right? So every time that you change something on one side, you change the offer that you can supply in terms of benefits on the other side. But it's absolutely right that we consider all of these issues in the round and make sure that we get the balance right, because it's not, this isn't something where there's a sort of very straightforward, obvious answer. There's a lot of competing interests to balance. And as officials, we sort of tried to present the board with an option that we think is a sort of good balance of priorities, and we've put that out now quite rightly to talk to the public and work out if we've got that balance right. Some wiggle room is small and can be sort of, the scheme can be tweaked. Some more fundamental wiggle room would require us to go back out to consultation, but that shouldn't be the deciding factor in thinking about this. It should be about getting the right scheme. Ting shared taxi in the city is an interesting idea, and I will take that away, thank you. Relying on, sorry, I've got my notes a bit scribbly there. Right, relying on Stagecoach and franchising. We envisaged that this could these bus service improvements could be delivered in one of two ways. One is quality bus partnerships, where sort of contracts are entered into with bus service companies that wouldn't have to be Stagecoach for new services. There are options there, and franchising is certainly one option that would give us a lot more wiggle room in terms of being able to offer the integrated ticketing and to set the services in the way that we know people might like us to do so. There's quite a lengthy legal process to go through on franchising, and I know the Mayor has committed to look at that, and we're of course, as you'd expect, working quite closely with him about these things speak to one another. But this proposal can be delivered in either scenario, and so it's not dependent on any future decision on franchising. Social enterprises, yes, we've picked that up as well in various focus groups. We had one with carers the other day, and we've had one with, or are shortly to have one with charities, and it's also something we're picking up through our events. So these are all things that we are going to take with us and work out how to work into any scheme that might be taken forward, and talk to the elected members about that. I think I covered everything, but please let me know if I missed anything.
Thanks so much, Lynn Miles. And now we'll go to Councillor Divkovic, and then to Mrs. Ewell, and then to Mrs. Goy, and then we'll come back to Lynn. And then after that, we've got Councillors Gorsford, Wood and Collis, and we'll come back to Lynn, and then we'll take our break. So, Councillor Divkovic first.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to kind of second Councillor Shields' point about businesses, local businesses in the city that have to, or that rely on obviously travelling in the city in order to make their money. I think a lot of small business owners especially are concerned about having to pay that charge. Like, for example, cleaning companies in the city that provide services to Airbnbs or, you know, hotels and subcontractors. So they're quite concerned, you know, as the middleman as well. And I also wanted to mention that I've spoken to people that haven't really been aware of the exemptions that are in place, and looking at the GCP website, it's actually quite hard to identify them. It's quite hidden. You'd find the brochures, I think, on page 11 at the bottom, on a brochure near the bottom of the website when you're taking the survey. So it's, I'd like to see the exemptions pointed out a bit more for those that are a bit more anxious, who have mobility issues, who are on a low income, because I don't think that those are being made loud enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Divkovic. And now to Hilary Goy. Hilary.
With all due respect, Ms. Miles, no bus is ever going to come to my end of Hurst Park Avenue. I will always have to walk to the end of the road. And there are many, many people in my position. I have to say, a quote, I can't quite remember who said it, but fine words butter no parsnips. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Ruth Ewell, you've gone off the list. So, were you going to ask another question, or you've
slightly facetious question, if I may? Do you include bus travel as a form of active travel? Because given how much walking is involved, getting to and between bus stops, it jolly well ought to.
Thank you. Back to you, Lynn Miles.
Thank you. Councillor Divkovic, I sort of note again your point about small traders. I should have said before, there are some small traders who we envisage this will deliver benefits for as well as costs, in particular those that do multiple stops in a day, so shorter calls, will, we hope, find themselves sitting in less traffic and therefore able to complete more calls in a day, and therefore potentially have that offset. We know that others would pass on those costs to their customers in much the same way as you're required to give a trader a resident parking permit that you've bought for them when they turn up, or pay for their parking. But I take your points, and those have been raised elsewhere, and we will take that away and look at that. That's what I've just described as what's currently envisaged. But I hear you telling me that might not be enough, and we'll go away and sort of take that, as I said. I'm sorry that people aren't aware of the exemptions. We've tried to say that clearly. I will take that away and talk to our team about whether we can make that more clear, because I certainly don't want to cause people unnecessary anxiety. There are obviously proposed exemptions for consultation at the moment rather than anything firm, but I think you're right. I would hate to think that people were worrying unnecessarily about that. Councillor Goy, point taken. I'm sorry.
I'm not a councillor.
Sorry.
I'm not a councillor, and indeed you're calling quite a few people councillors who may not be. I am an interested member of the public.
I apologise for that. As I mentioned, I'm new in post as of a couple of weeks ago, so I'm sorry I'm not fully up to speed yet. My apologies. Councillor Yule or Mrs Yule. No, I cast public transport. Sorry, bus travel is public transport. You're absolutely right to point out that almost all public transport journeys start and end with some element of active transport. So your point is also taken.
Thank you. And now we have councillors Gorsford Wood and Councillor and Collis, and then we'll come back to you, Lynn Miles, and then we'll go to a short break. So please, Jenny, Councillor Gorsford Wood.
May I let Councillor Collis come in front of me, because I've got rather a peculiar question, I think.
Okay, please, Councillor Collis.
Okay, Lynn, I just wanted to come back at you to you on the reply you gave me about the reimbursement. I really think, with respect, I think you need to get a much clearer idea, and you need to tell people there is a huge amount of anxiety about all different parts of this scheme, and there's a huge amount of mistrust. I think I get the impression from residents that I've spoken to that they think things are being hidden. I don't believe that is the case, but I just think you need to let people know what is going to happen. It is appropriate for them. If you live and survive on a low income, or you're sort of near the breadline, really every penny counts, and people are hugely worried about this. And I think it will help the GCP, and it will help the consultation. I mean, it will just help the whole process if we are just much more open with people. It's only going to make it worse if they don't know. Thank you.
Thanks. And just before we come to Councillor Gorsford Wood's peculiar question, I'd just like to add to that, the thing about needing to get a reimbursement is that sometimes it's actually too hard to do it, because you have to have some form of paperwork or get on the internet somehow. You've got to have a bank account and so on, and some people just actually can't do it because they're so noses above the water and in real despair that adding another burden to them it might not sound enormous, but it can really be enormous. But over to you, Councillor Gorsford Wood.
Well, actually, Councillor Scott, you've partly covered the question. Having been involved in developing systems, the exemption system is going to be quite complicated to build. And I think the money for that needs to be factored in. So I'm talking about an IT system and how user-friendly it will be. One of the things that I think needs to be said very much up front is about the money and funding and getting buses in first. I mean, the only reason, I mean, I certainly support a consultation. It has to be made clear to everybody that their views are being taken on board. And with a formal consultation, people's, from my background, although you can group them into types of questions that people are raising, they need to be answered. So that's the first thing. And this is where I'm going to just raise the point of why don't we have cross-subsidiarity of buses? I used to live in the Netherlands as well, or I said public transport. I think that needs to be made clear. One of the things that people have asked me as well is that they don't really understand what the GCP is and how it's constituted and how decisions are made. So I know that there is under governance, I think it's on the second separate page. I don't know whether it's been changed in the last week, but I did find more information. But I think that needs to be made a lot easier for people to access. And that's a general point rather than specific to this consultation. But it might help with people understanding what the role is and why this potential programme is going through GCP and the issues of money and subsidiary, or why we can't do what they do in London, basically. Okay, thank you.
Good. Lynn Miles.
Thanks, Chair. In response to Councillor Collis about needing to get the detail and to communicate that, and also Councillor Gawthorpe made a similar point about questions needing to be answered. I do take your point on that, but I would push back a little bit to say you would expect and rightly hope of us that we make mindful use of public money here. And so there is an extent to which it wouldn't be appropriate for us to work through every detail of how this might look before we have a good idea of how people want the scheme to be shaped and whether people want to go ahead and whether a decision has been taken. So there are in sort of in the Department of Transport sort of formal methodology for the public sector taking this forward, there is quite rightly a stage where you do some preliminary work and you decide on the basis of that if it feels worth taking forward, and then you do some further work and elaborate the detail. And there are sort of gateways to avoid you sort of doing an awful lot of abortive work. And it's interesting. I completely understand that people want to hear more detail, but I can't tell them exactly how a reimbursement scheme would work, because we just don't know if there's such a scheme to be designed in detail at this point. And so it just that's the reason why it's certainly not an attempt to try to hide anything from anyone or to be closed on that. And likewise, I know that the more detail you present to people, the more they worry that you've taken decisions that you have not taken, or that the elected members have not taken, because it feels to them as though, well, this is so detailed, it must be fixed, and that certainly isn't the case as well. So I do hear you, but it's not going to be possible to give more detail before we sort of take a decision as to, or before elected members take a decision as to whether or not they want to go forward with this. In terms of the comment about IT systems being expensive and being costed in, you're correct, there is some cost implicit in that. The City deal gives us some money to front fund the cost of that there wouldn't otherwise be. There is a sort of full set of financial modelling in the business case work that has been done, which is online, and I'm happy to circulate a link to that. But it certainly has been factored in already to the numbers that have been presented. In answer to your question about why no cross-subsidy of buses, there's a long answer to that question. The short answer is because everywhere in the UK except for London, buses have been deregulated, which means they are essentially run by the private sector, and they run as a commercial concern. And so all bus operators just run them as any business would, and they sort of, as their shareholders demand of them, they will run the routes that make them sort of maximise their profits. They will occasionally choose to cross-subsidise more popular bus routes, less popular bus routes with more popular ones, where that makes sense for their wider business model and they think it will support people onto the network. But they're certainly under no obligation to do so, and there's very little that local government can do to require them to do so. That's different in London, where London always retained the ability to franchise and essentially controls the network and essentially sort of says, this is how we'd like the network to be, this is the fares you will charge, these are the routes you'll run, and the service patterns and the terms and conditions of the drivers and all of those things, and then puts out a contract and people bid for it, and that's where the competition is. Everywhere else the competition is on the road, and it's about which bus turns up first and which services people choose to run, or businesses choose to run. And in response to the comments about the Greater Cambridge Partnership, I'm very happy to sort of be clear on the record here. The Greater Cambridge Partnership exists as essentially a joint committee of the three participating local authorities, so Cambridge City, South Cambridgeshire District Council and the County Council. There are also non-voting members from the university and from the CPCA Business Board. It exists to deliver on the city deal that was signed between Greater Cambridge and central government about 8 years ago. I'm frantically doing maths in my head there. And that was 500 million of central government funding given to the area to support them to deliver growth in Greater Cambridge, and to do that in a sort of sustainable and inclusive way. And the majority of the discussion at the time when the agreement was signed was focused on the fact that Cambridge was having this great economic success, but that it wasn't fully inclusive, and that businesses were sort of struggling to grow, people were struggling to live in an overheating housing market, were having to travel ever further. Congestion was getting worse and worse and worse. Businesses were struggling with that, and people were having quite miserable lives. And so the programme of the GCP is primarily, although not exclusively, geared towards delivering that, and this is one element of it. I take your point about the communication, and I'll take that away and speak to our web team and see what we can do about making it clearer.
Thanks so much, Lynn. And you were actually right about the 8 years. Yeah. Now, look, I can see two hands there, Councillor Divkovic and Ms. Goy, but were they new hands or are they ancient ones? Oh, goody. Lovely. Because look, if we say thank you so much to Lynn Miles for coming from the Greater Cambridge Partnership, and we do appreciate the way that you've responded so openly to all the questions. We appreciate that. We look forward to receiving the presentation that you have, and we'll circulate that. And we'll end at this note with a 5-minute break, and we'll come back at 8:30. But thank you, Lynn Miles. And thank you all for participating so well with all our questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, you're now live.
Oh, great. Thanks so much. Welcome back to North Area Committee. And we're now moving on to our next agenda item, which is agenda item 6, the Environmental Improvement Program, which is otherwise known as EIP. So whenever anybody is saying EIP, we have to remember it's the Environmental Improvement Program, but then this one is for the year 2022 to 2023. And we're joined by James Ogle and John Richards, who are project officers with the Cambridge City Council. And so it's over to James and to John to present or to introduce this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And good evening, everybody. For those that don't know me, and it's a few years since we last invited environmental improvements within Cambridge. I'm a project leader within the Streets and Open Spaces team of Environment Services, and I'm the overall lead officer for the Environmental Improvement Programme. And as Chair has said, I'm joined this evening by my colleague James Ogle, who has actually done a lot of the background legwork on pulling together the programme which we're putting before you this evening. So just a bit of background for you. As I say, we last invited environmental improvements in 2019-20, and the team are still very actively involved in developing and delivering that programme of projects. There were over 50 projects adopted citywide at that point. And in 2020, we had to pause the programme due to the impacts of the COVID pandemic and the resource pressures that brought. So there has been a pause, but we are picking things up again now, and the delivery of that programme continues. We did circulate earlier today the link to an update for councillors on the programme that has already been committed, just for your information. And apologies that wasn't included with the original report, but that's there for you should you wish to follow up progress on any particular projects previously agreed. So in terms of the new programme, we've got a new budget again for 2022-3, which we've been working towards now with the Executive Councillor. So we've undertaken a review of environmental improvements and the way the programme has worked in recent rounds. So that work concluded earlier in 2020. And we're now at the point where we've been able to go out to invite new scheme submissions. We've done that this time using the council's new engagement platform, which is a product called Citizens Lab, and we've been very keen to use this application process as a bit of a sort of a trial really for that new system to see how well it works. So we've done things a little bit differently this time. So we invited scheme applications through that portal through September and October. We've had a very good response actually this time round. So we've had responses directly from members of the public as well as local ward councillors as we normally do. So the number of applications this year have been higher than in previous rounds, which is very encouraging. The new portal also gives us the opportunity to effectively flag, or for members of the public to sort of rate or offer their support to individual scheme requests that are logged on the system. So people can see what's been entered onto the system, and they can basically vote for those that they are in support of. So that's a new tool that we've made use of this year as well. So the report before you this evening actually gives some information on some of those projects that have got particularly high levels of support in local communities. So we've done it through a sort of a thumbs up and thumbs down approach. There is one area in the report, Chair, which I'll draw the committee's attention to, and that's paragraph 3.1 and 3.3, which are actually contradictory. So we actually allocate funding to environmental improvements across Cambridge in two ways. We have an overall budget of £170,000, and what we do is we reserve £100,000 of that for allocation across the 4 area committees proportionate to population within those areas, and the remaining £70,000 is put towards a centralised strategic allocation, which is allocated citywide. And where particular requests come forward that meet the eligibility criteria for the strategic funding block, we consider funding them through those funds rather than through local area funds. And the eligibility criteria for the strategic funding block really reflect the council's objectives, its core objectives around sort of things like climate change and biodiversity and fairness and helping people in need. So we've tried to prioritise certain projects towards that strategic block. So we've laid out before you the scheme submissions that have been put forward. What we're looking for this evening is the committee's recommendations on which of those projects ought to form part of the new programme, both the local area programme for North Area and to go forward for funding from the strategic element of funding. Ultimately, the approvals for the projects are given are given by the Executive Councillor for this particular service area. And what we're in the process of doing now is taking these reports through the 4 different area committees, letting area committee councillors look at the submissions that have come forward in their area, consider the merits of each and recommend a programme to us that we can then take to the Executive Councillor for further approval. And at that stage, we then look to build the programme to deliver through 2023, hopefully. So the position that we're at now is that we've tabled the report for you. We have just over £26,500 of local area funding for North Area in the current round. What we've tried to do as well in Appendix B, we've laid out each of the scheme submissions, and we've tried to give them something of a sort of a red, amber, green delivery rating to help guide you towards those which might be more straightforward than others. And the good news is that the majority of those, certainly all of those, falling within the sort of the green category, and this is very much an officer assessment. We've assessed the best part of 100 of these requests over the last few weeks. So it's a sort of a desk-based assessment. It's not done in a huge amount of detail, and members of the committee may well have questions or disagree with the recommendations that we've made, but we've tried to be sort of fair and impartial and assess all the submissions that have come forward on an equal basis, and try to give some guidance to councillors as to those that we think would be more straightforward to deliver. And I think it's important to remember here that what we try and focus EIP towards is delivering a large number of small value or small cost improvements that do make a meaningful improvement across the city and certainly within local areas. So the good news is, Chair, that you should be able to afford to do all of those that we flagged potentially as being green within the funding allocation that you have available this year. And then you have a small remaining element of funding to potentially consider one or two of the smaller schemes that might fall within the amber block. Also in the report are identified a number of those projects that we do consider would be eligible for strategic funding. So those don't need to be considered from the local area funds. But again, we would invite comments from councillors on their suitability for inclusion. And reporting to the Executive Councillor for funding from the strategic block. And there are a few projects that have come forward which we feel may well be suited to either City Council or partner funding, but perhaps aren't best suited to environmental improvement programmes. So for those that know about the County Council's annual programme of local highways improvements, the county is again inviting applications for their programme for next year. So anything that's come forward in this round that is really focused towards, core improvements of the public highway or transport network, we tend to refer to the County Council for consideration through their programme. And there are other elements that the elements of work enhancements that the City Council uses Section 106 funding for. So that tends to be works, enhancement works to play areas and those sorts of things. Play equipment, particularly in open spaces and parks, is normally funded through Section 106 funding rather than environmental improvement funding. We tend to try and utilise EIP to fill some of the gaps that the other funding streams are not actually meeting. So, Chair, I think at that stage, unless my colleague James Ogle has anything to add, I'd happily hand over to the committee and take any questions that people have. James has got a handy ready reckoner to hand to sort of add up scheme totals and those sorts of things if we need it. So hopefully we can move through this fairly swiftly. Thank you.
I have nothing to add, so yeah, I want to move on.
Right. Good. Thanks, James, and thank you, John. So we've got 4. Perhaps if we have Councillor Collis, Bird and Todd Jones, and then we'll come back to John and James, and then we'll go on to Councillor Shield and if somebody else comes along. So over to you, Councillor Collis.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening to John and James, and thanks for coming along. I've got a statement and a question. Sarah has very kindly put in the chat a reminder that for anyone who is in the meeting who doesn't know, I'll be the executive councillor taking the official decision on these. But I did want to just say to the committee that, you know, I'm looking forward to a sort of good, robust debate on these and very much wanting to hear what people have to say about them. And John, I've got a question about a couple of the proposals, N9 and N10, the two that are about Arbury Court, tidying up the area around Arbury Court, which obviously have been marked red. I know the reason for that, but could you please explain to the committee why they are red and why those aren't being recommended to be put forward? Because I think that might be a bit unclear. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Good. Councillor Bird. You're on mute, Councillor.
Sorry. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, John and James. Okay, I've got a couple of issues I'd like to discuss. First of all is N16 2023, Pearl Close. I put in for this one in 2019-20, and I think there's been a confusion the way this has been written, because you're saying about investigation with highways. There's nothing to do with highways with this one, because it's the park between Pearl Close and Oak Tree Avenues, a tiny park. And I put in there for some play equipment and for a community garden. But it's been completely changed on this paperwork. So that's my first one. My second one is N21 2023. Which again is on Scotland Road, and this is I've asked for benches, and also I went around to this small play area to speak to the kids, and it was actually the kids that told me what they wanted, and they wanted football nets, a couple of football nets, and a climbing frame, and that's out the babes' mouths. And I'm so disappointed to see that you'll only fund the benches, but not the play equipment. And the thing is, there's no chance East Chesterton's going to be able to get 106 money, because that comes from the developers, if I'm correct. And I think that was the last one. Yes, it was. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Todd Jones.
Yep, thank you, Chair, and thanks, John and James. Just a comment really about SN7 2023, about improving biodiversity and Carriage Road, bit of green space there. Glad to see that 38 thumbs up, it swept the board as far as I can see. Just a query really, I think I did have this discussion with James, you might want to comment, James, but my understanding on that this may well meet the strategic objectives the council sets in terms of biodiversity. So given that it's a scheme that could be up to 10k, can I just check that that is where it's likely to be funded from? In other words, the 70k strategic pot rather than the North Area Committee sort of local pot, because I wouldn't like it to see, I wouldn't like to see it, as a result, reduce the opportunity for some of the other schemes that are clearly more local. So it would be nice to have a bit of confirmation on that. And just to say thanks again from all the RB councillors for the work with the Histon Road Area Residents Association, who have been very helpful in bringing this forward. Thanks.
Perhaps actually we will, Councillor Shield, do you mind coming in now, and then we'll come to John. I hope it's not too many questions, John, but perhaps Councillor Shield, do you mind putting your point of view now?
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
And echo what Councillor Todd Jones has said in terms of our appreciation of all the great work that's going on here. I think my question sort of overlaps a little bit with what Councillor Collis has already covered, but it is to do with the red. Sorry to focus on the reds rather than the greens and the ambers. I do understand and accept that alternative funding available is mentioned here, and you mentioned, John, yourself, that for some of these projects, although they may look very good, it's not the end of the line if they do get red, because there is appropriate funding for an alternative source. But I'm thinking that on one of them, it does seem to, one of the three reds that I'm looking at, it does seem very much an EIP type project. And it's the more bee-friendly plants and flowers into our communal garden to make a sanctuary for honeybees and other potential pollinators, make small garden around, which attracts pollinators all through around the year, use zinc, aluminium, magnesium, stainless steel, metal, raised planters. These are an ideal solution for growing in difficult climatic conditions. I noticed that the comment at the end is questionable broader public benefit for investment. If I could just play devil's advocate for a minute, I'm sort of thinking that that looks to me like a fairly small manageable project, and maybe the public benefit could be that those zinc, aluminium, magnesium, stainless steel planters could spread further afield if successful in that location. Just playing devil's advocate, because it's quite a manageable project and a smallish one, I can't help feeling that if I was the, and I don't know the person that has submitted this, but I'd feel a little bit crestfallen, I think. I do understand with the other two reds that both concern Arbury Court, I would fully support the improvements. Councillor Cox-Condren has already done a tremendous amount of work, as has Councillor Collis, in the Arbury Court area. So in broad sense, I would certainly support what's being proposed in those two other reds for Arbury Court. But I do take on board what you said, John, that the funding could come from elsewhere, but I'm not sure what the alternative source of funding could be for something like the bee-friendly plants and pollinators idea that is N15. It's about halfway down page 28. And so I'm just wondering, when the feedback goes to whoever has submitted the idea, I'm hoping that maybe the feedback that they would get would perhaps be a little bit more detailed than what we're seeing, sort of executive summary style at the end there, so that they don't kind of lose heart and for example, although it says no, would they get some suggestions that how else the funding could be secured? Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you, Councillor Shield. Yes, John.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for those questions, councillors. I'll respond to them in the order that they've come. But before I do that, I will add, and apologies for not mentioning this in the introduction, but we are actually asking you also to agree a reserve list if you're able to do that. And the purpose for that is that if we find that any of the other areas across the city are undersubscribed in the number of bids that have come forward, there may be an opportunity potentially with the approval of the Executive Councillor to look at funding additional projects in North through savings in other areas if their funding isn't allocated. Excuse me, I am recovering with a bit of a cough at the moment. So that's something that we've added into the report, and that might potentially enable more projects to move forward in a particular area. But just turning to the questions in turn, I think Councillor Collis's question about the Arbury Court projects, I think the reason we flagged that red in this particular report is that we're focused very much on the estate that Streets and Open Spaces or Environment Services manages as an asset on behalf of the council. And I think our feeling is that works there would be more suited to the council's programme of estate improvements. So that's something that's facilitated through the Estates and Facilities Service. So I think that's why we're suggesting that there might be more other more appropriate sources of city council funding that might be able to help with those aspirations. So that's the first one. The second question in relation to Pearl Close, particularly from Councillor Bird. So I think that there is some Section 106 funding allocated to improvement of the green space at Pearl Close, Councillor Bird, which a colleague of mine, John Parrott, is taking forward. But my understanding is that this particular request that has come forward and is put before you this evening does relate to the length of grassed verge which is next to the carriageway and is parked upon. So there is actually a gap in the footway along that side of Pearl Close, and there's a section of grass verge that runs adjacent to the open green space area. So the footway is discontinuous, and people do actually park on that length of grass. And I think what we're suggesting here is that, firstly, the consent of the Highway Authority would be needed for any change there. That would be the first point. The second would be actually addressing parking issues is really more suited to the county's programme of local highways improvements. But also my concern really there is that if something is done either by ourselves or by the county council to deter parking on that grass area, there is already evidence that the footways along Pearl Close are already being parked upon by vehicles. And I think that actually denying people the opportunity to park on the grass verge is likely to lead to an increase in parking on the footways, thus obstructing them for people to use the footways. So I think in summary, we don't really think it's an easy issue to address, certainly not through EIP, and would be more suited to local highways improvements. The question from Councillor Todd Jones about SN7, which is the Mayfield School project, I'm confident, hopefully James will back me up, that we do feel that one is eligible for the strategic block of funding. Yes, so I don't think that one needs to be considered from local area funds, which I think is good news for the local area pot. And Councillor Shields' question about N15. I agree that EIP funding would be the most suited form of funding for that type of initiative. I think our question, Councillor Shield, really is whether the communal garden is a shared private space for residents or whether it has a sort of a broader public benefit and public amenity. So, to what degree the general public realm is going to benefit from improvements carried forward within that local communal space. And if it is a question of bees and other pollinators effectively, contributing to the biodiversity benefit of the broader area, then I think it is something that could be funded through EIP. So it may just be a question of looking at the detail, I think, and understanding a bit more about how that would actually work. But
I think we were also concerned a little bit about the actual amount they was asking for, which was £5,000 for a small area, which may not be, for the benefit of the investment might not be really for the broader public. It'd just be for 3 or 4, 5 different masonette flats. And we didn't really understand why needed aluminium planters and things like that as well. That's really
thanks, James.
Why we didn't consider that. The other thing that we haven't gone back to Councillor Bird on is N21, which was Scotland Road.
Football nets, yes, apologies.
Yes, football nets and play can't really be funded through EIP. It's not our core reason for funding. It's considered an environmental improvement, although it's a sports and play improvement. No doubt there's some merit in that, and potentially there may be some Section 106. Not something EIP generally pays for. Whereas benches, yes, we do that through kind of social interaction and encouraging people to access their environment and, well, sit and socialise really and enjoy the area.
I think it's worth adding, councillors, to that the council is currently in the process of taking stock of delivery of previous Section 106 programme commitments and identifying where further funding is available, with the potential for running a further round of project applications in those wards where there is funding for particular contribution types still available. So, Councillor Bird, that may well in fact be something that could potentially be funded through Section 106 monies if it was suited to that round. Thank you.
I've got to actually intercede here for a moment, because I know this agenda item is extremely important, but we've also got the agenda item which is the opportunity for the residents to make a contribution. We've got Mr. Gino Henry and we've got Ms. Hilary Goy, and we've also got a statement from Ms. Leslie Gerbert from the Arbury Court Friends of Arbury Court Library, the Friends of Milton Road Library, and the Friends of the Central Library. And it's my fault actually, because I was thinking that the meeting ended at 9:30, not at 9. So I'm going to request that we all agree that we can go through to 9:30, so that I'm not put in the position of having been extremely discourteous to the people that I invited to make their presentations on an agenda item, which is actually to engage the residents rather than just have councillors engaging in a way that is not necessarily inclusive of residents. So will everybody agree that we can go to 9:30? Because otherwise, as I say, I've been extraordinarily rude by inviting these people to contribute. Yeah. Are we able to do that? Can I ask Mrs. Steed, are we able to do this in accordance with the technology and so forth?
Chair, yes, please feel free to carry on. The meeting should automatically end at 9 o'clock.
Oh, lovely. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you. So, yes, well, so let's just, I can see that we've got Councillor Bird's hand up. It was Councillor Todd Jones first, then Councillor Bird, and then Councillor Shield. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a quick query, John and James, about the process in terms of the two Arbury Court proposals, how that kind of gets taken forward in terms of exploring the alternative funding that might be available. Presumably it's been flagged up by local residents, so that is presumably taken on to the appropriate sort of officers in terms of looking at the alternative funding that might be available for these proposals. Can you just say a little bit more about how that would happen?
Chair, shall I do that now, or do you want to take more questions first?
If we have Councillor Bird and Councillor Shield, and then we'll come back to you, John. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that, John. I think with the Pearl Close, I think I need to have a walk around with either you or James, because I think you're still getting confused. This play area is down a passageway. It's nowhere on Pearl Close. So I think I'll arrange a meeting to go round with you so we can go over that one. But you just said a minute ago that we don't fund play equipment, but on page 33 of your report, you're going to be doing the pulley play area, which has got thumbs up 3. So I can't understand where you can do one but can't do the other, or am I reading this wrong? Thank you.
And Councillor Shield.
Oh yes, thank you, Chair. And just a very quick supplementary for John and James. Would applicants be getting a little bit more detail in terms of the feedback, especially when it has been unsuccessful? For example, bearing in mind the point that James raised, the figure of 5,000 on the N15, I understand that might be an example of something that could be reviewed by the applicant, maybe tailored or adjusted for the next round, or indeed it could be like that the feedback might say, actually, this really isn't the sort of thing that we can foresee doing in the future. But there may be others where it's a red this time around, but perhaps with a few changes that could be easily done, and a few adjustments, modifications, the applicant could come back again next time. Thank you.
John, James. Not sure which one's answering.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for those further questions. The first one from Councillor Todd Jones, just about the Arbury Court projects, and I'd reiterate that really the assessment that's been undertaken thus far is just a very simplistic one. So I think the next step would be to follow through those potential linkages with colleagues who might have more of a role in taking forward, considering improvements to that particular asset of the council. So that would be the approach, would be to probably Will Barfield in our estates and facilities team, and I think he does have a programme of estate improvements that he could potentially consider those types of works from. So we will follow that up, Councillor. Councillor Bird, yes, certainly very open to a meeting to look at Pearl Close. Your second question about the pulley play area, I think I might have to defer to James on that one, because he understands the details of the projects that have come forward in greater detail than I do. And secondly, James, I think just the question from Councillor Shield about how we respond to applicants, particularly where we might not be taking forward suggestions, and whether the Citizens Lab platform actually provides us a convenient way of doing that.
We are going to respond to applicants, whether successful or not. We will likely share that feedback with councillors. So if there are others who have been involved with the project and they want to say this is why it didn't go through, they'll be able to do that. And as that application N15, I think, yes, with a few modifications and changes, it certainly could be put in future years. And it does fit fairly well with EIP, except it was just the amount and if it was really publicly accessible. But maybe the other question from Councillor Bird regarding pulley play area, and that's table 3, as you rightly say, is page, I don't know, it's page 17 on my report, but it might not be on yours. We're not going to be funding that through EIP. And we've suggested that they more appropriately be funded elsewhere. So they're basically, we don't fund play areas, and we don't fund, as also we had Make Stretton Avenue, Bateson Road, Crossroads safe for school kids. Very worthy project. However, it's more likely to be funded through local highway initiative and not through EIP.
Thank you. And Councillor Shield's question. Or was it responded?
I think we answered that.
Oh, big.
It was fine. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, excellent.
Thanks.
Good.
Yeah,
okay.
cheers.
Well, it just seems to me that from the discussion that's been had, apart from the play area issue, and then the one that Councillor Shield referred to earlier about making sure that the person who put the proposition forward was not left feeling totally discouraged and deflated and so forth. I think it seems to me that we're generally in agreement with the proposals that have been put forward, and think that by the officers and the way that the various bids, I suppose, if one can put it in those terms, have been addressed. And is that the general feeling of the group, that we're generally happy with what's been proposed by the officers? I can't see any. I can't see any dissent. So I think that what we do need to say is thanks so much for coming, James and James Ogle and John Richards. We appreciate all the work that's been put in, and it is a really wonderful program. And so I think that we're going to look forward to the Executive Councillor making her decision ultimately, and bearing in mind the discussion that we've had here this evening. So thank you. Thank you.
I suppose the assumption there is then that the Greens would be funded and there would be 2 or 3 of the Ambers looked at, because I think the Greens add up to 22,000 and we've got 26. So there is another 4,000, some of those Ambers we may want to consider. Is there any ones of the Ambers that people particularly want to go forward, or councillors, I suppose? Or are you happy for us to make a choice? I don't think they add up to too much more than 4,000.
And then, as you said earlier, John, if there's some flexibility because all the other areas haven't used up all their allocation.
It could be reserved as well.
That's right. I see Councillor Todd Jones and Councillor Shield have got their hands up. Are they new hands or old ones?
They are new.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, just a query. I mean, a couple of these, proposals that are at Amber are for benches, which I think are kind of subject to public consultation, because I know that can be a difficult issue in terms of installing benches, in terms of the local residents' view of them. So are those kind of, could they be included subject to the local consultation on those benches?
Yeah, that would make sense. If it's a positive consultation, then we'd go ahead. If it's not, we would say, well, actually, we'll go ahead with something else.
Councillor Shield.
Mine was very quick, Chair, and also to do with benches. That yes, if given free rein, I know this is hypothetical, James, and I take your point on that, but if we're given free rein to choose an Amber, then the bench for Hazelwood Close jumps out at me as a good one, pending what Councillor Todd Jones has said about local consultation, and assuming that residents all around are happy and behind it. But that seems like a really nice one. Okay, thank you.
So thanks so much, John Richards and James Ogle, for this presentation and the discussion on the environmental improvement programs. Thank you. And now, good. Thanks. We've got to, now we move on to our final, effectively our final item on the agenda, and I do have to apologise sincerely to Hilary Goy and to Gino Henry, and I shall make sure it's my fault, but that this agenda item, which is to engage the residents and to make sure that what at least I'm endeavouring to do is to make North Area Committee more of a venue where residents can have some input and some say. So I'm sorry, you're not going to benefit, Gino Henry or Hilary Goy, from my apology and my sincere commitment that this item will be higher on the agenda next time. But what this agenda item is that there are friends of the libraries, and we're very fortunate in North Area to have 2 libraries. Perhaps I shouldn't say that too loudly to the County Council ears, not the ones that are present, but externally. But we've got Arbury Court Library, and we've got the Friends of Arbury Court Library. The chair of that is Leslie Gilbert, who has been off to the dentist today, had 3 tooths removed, and so Mrs. Steed will read her report. And we also have Hilary Goy, who is the chair of Friends of Central Library and who revived Central Library together with others, friends of. And we have Gino Henry, who is a representative, a member of the committee of the Friends of Milton Road Library. We were hoping to have Jill Young too, but there were problems with teams. So perhaps if I can hand over to you, Hilary Goy, so that you can tell us about the Friends of Central, Cambridge Central Library, and what sort of activities you've engaged in.
We started the Friends of the Central Library. The constitution dates from 2015, but our reasons for starting it were before that, when the county council wanted to make the third floor into a kind of business centre. There were various reasons why this was flawed that I won't go into now. But the whole thing collapsed after a great deal of representations from various of us who were concerned about the integrity of the library, when it was found that the person who was actually putting it forward from outside had actually been banned from being a director in England for several years. This had not been part of the due diligence of the council. All this will be in county council minutes. But a group of us felt sufficiently concerned that the Central Library was rather a poor relation when it came to friends groups. And so what we did was to set up a friends group for the Central Library in 2015. We had various problems. It wasn't easy to be accepted by the library authorities once the library system was directed away from particular managers who were based at the library. As the system changed, we didn't really know all the time who we were speaking to, who we were dealing with. But we used to run events where we could. We had one talk from the man behind the Cambridge Shakespeare Festival, and various other things. We had readings of books about Cambridge and so on. What we found difficult was to get, if you like, to get a concerted audience, particularly because evening events in the Central Library were very difficult because of the security of the Lion Yard. But we tried our best. We had much more success with a craft stall, which sold stationery, scarves, things that various of us had made, and also stationery items and books that were being decommissioned from the library, particularly from the Cambridgeshire collection. And we had very good sales on that. However, when the lockdown happened, obviously we had to come to a complete standstill. And as the lockdown was released, we realised that people were not going to congregate to look through a stall of any kind. We also had difficulty with the fact that the Central Library is diffuse. Local libraries have local centres and they can have social events. They can, if you like, have, people bonds. They know one another and they know what they're doing it for. What we found we were forced to do last year and earlier this year, we actually formulated it, was we've put it on ice for the time being. All the funds were given to the Cambridgeshire collection, but we have not dissolved the Friends of the Cambridge Central Library. But conditions at the moment are, as yet, not really quite suitable for us to flourish. Certainly, if there are any threats to the library, I'm quite sure that we will regroup very quickly. But in a sense, the times we are in meant that we needed to just step back, but not actually dissolve the group.
Myself. Thank you so much, Hilary. It was interesting to hear about the episode of the third floor. And I must just say, before coming to Gino Henry, that there is there is a proposal for the third floor that is in train at the moment. The plans are on the ground floor, the incoming level of the Central Library at the moment. And the plans will be there until the 2nd of December. So I'm just saying to people, if you're interested, it is not a privatisation project. It's to have more community involvement and space up there on the third floor. So please do go and look at the plans, and they will be on the website. If not tomorrow, it'll be Monday. So, and we might therefore, Hilary, revive the Friends of the Central Library to get submissions in on this proposal. But thanks so much. I appreciate it. And thank you for staying till this late hour. And also to Gino Henry, thank you very much for staying. And perhaps you tell us what's happening at Milton Road Library.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Yes, certainly. And firstly, my apologies that my colleague Jill Young's not able to join us. She's had technical problems. The Friends of Milton Road Library has been in existence at least for the last 10 years or so while I've been involved, but probably longer. Thanks very much to Richard Robertson, who was very anxious to save the library, which was under threat of closure at one stage. He got a committee going, which has been very active. We currently have 11 members on the committee, and at our recent meeting earlier on this week, in fact, 10 out of the 11 were present, which was great. The committee meets generally every 2 months or so, and we've now delighted to have a minutes secretary who's able to keep the minutes and make sure that we all do the things that we've promised to do. We organise a range of events at the library whenever this has been possible. Obviously, during COVID, this was impossible, so events were held online using Zoom, which, after some teething problems, worked very well. We liaise closely, obviously, with the library staff and have purchased a number of items for the library. A couple of examples, some bean bags for the children's library some years ago, and most recently a book trolley for the library staff. We liaised also with the library service regarding the design and the facilities of the new library. The old library had to be dismantled because of structural problems, cracks in the building, the wall, and so on. And that has now been rebuilt and is working well. Also organising book sales to raise funds, often combined with events in the library garden, including sometimes musicians and singers. Organising storytelling sessions, particularly by Marion Leaper, who does a great job, but aided by volunteers trained by Marion, but the training courses for which have been paid for by the Friends of Milton Road Library. These are obviously for younger children. The membership of the Friends of Milton Road Library is currently just under 100. They pay a small annual subscription, £5 for individuals, £8 for family or household members, with reduced rates for those who are unwaged. In addition, we have a mailing list which is free to join in order to be kept informed of activities and events. The advantage of being a member being that virtually all events are free. But we always welcome new members and those who'd just like to be kept advised of our activities on the mailing list. We have an active and first-rate events team who organise and coordinate the events, most of which are held on weekday evenings, but some at the weekend. And this I should say has been prepared by Jill Young. Going back to the last meeting on the eve before the closure of the old library, we had a splendid talk by Simon Singh, a well-known science communicator, on Professor Sir Andrew Wiles, who was responsible for solving Fermat's last theorem. And that had a very interesting story. Andrew Wiles, at the age of 10, called into the library one afternoon on his way back from school and picked up a book which mentioned Fermat's last theorem. And some, I think 50 years later, he finally managed to solve this theorem, which nobody in the meantime had been able to do, much to the acclaim of the British scientific community. So while the library was being built, we had some talks in Milton Road School. We were eventually able to return to the new library, but then shut down for COVID. Since then, we've had a whole range of different activities, one involving two local poets who'd never met before, but dovetailed together beautifully. Large variety of talks, including local artists who knew and worked together, and two talks by members of our own committee, the late Michael Bond, on the history of an old family clock, and his research project was made a fascinating talk. And also Shahida Rahman, who has published a book that she'd written on an ayah's choice, which included much interesting social history about ayahs in this country and in the Indian subcontinent. Shahida also arranged 2 visits and tours of the new Cambridge Central Mosque, which were very popular and well attended. We also had an interesting and fascinating talk really by an academic, Professor Mary Janau, about Clara Rackham, Cambridge social worker, teacher, supporter of the poor, after whom we hope to name one of the 2 community rooms in the library after her, and the other one after Andrew Wiles. We should mention contributions by the late Jeff Hales, who gave us some wonderful talks and dramatic events. Also singer Rex Freeman and his accompanist Rosemary, who gave us much enjoyment. And lastly, Jill's favourite, Sue Grossi, on self-publishing. Her own books on fiction about historical crimes of fraud, mainly because of her wonderful rapport with the audience. We had a very interesting guided walk along Hobson's Conduit by Andrew Slatter, a local expert. And lastly, the hot news, we've just had acceptance by Anna Whitelock, Professor Anna Whitelock, an academic specialist on the history of the royal family, who has agreed to talk about the future of the firm, as they call themselves, and that will probably be in May. However, tomorrow, literally tomorrow, we have our next event about local food hubs. That's going to be clearly a very hot topic. I think there's also going to be mention also of the warm room scheme, which has just started at Milton Road Library. But this talk is at 7:30, refreshments available, and do please come along and support it. No entrance fee, but donations, which will be very welcomed, will go to the food hub. To recap, welcome new ideas, suggestions, talks for events. We welcome new members, people who just like to be added to the mailing list. Do just go into the library, speak to the library staff. They can give you a form to fill in, or go to the website. It's not currently as up to date as we would like it, but there is also an email address there which you can use. I'd like, if I may, though, just to conclude with a little story, a true story, which demonstrates, I think, the value, the use of the Friends and, of course, of the libraries themselves. A member of the Friends of Milton Road Library just the other day found an item which had been dropped by accident in a location where it was clearly unlikely ever to be found again. It had a name in it, first name, surname, but no address, phone number or email address. He took it home. He tried directory inquiries, Google and other sources to try to find its owner. Then he thought, I know of an organisation who might be able to help. He contacted the librarian at Milton Road Library, and he came back saying, oh yes, I know them. They're regular visitors here. Drop it in to me and I'll make sure it gets back to them. So it has been dropped in to them, and I'm sure that by now it has been returned, if not will be in the very near future. So thank you, Jocelyn. It is a great organisation. Do come and support us, and the library as well.
Good. Thanks so much, Gino Henry. And thank you again, Hilary Goy. I am so sorry that it's so late in the evening. And as I said, I'll make sure that this item is much higher up on the agenda. It's my fault, and I accept responsibility, absolutely. There was to be a report from Leslie Gubert that Mrs. Steed was going to read out, but I think the best thing to do is, if we can have permission, to attach that report to as an appendix to the minutes, so that it will be there on record. That's about the Arbury Court Library, where they engage in various activities. I think they've had the guides there, and so on, and also had events associated with the Arbury Carnival. So thank you so much, Hilary, and thank you, Gino. And so the final part of the event is the questions that are part of the public forum. And I'll just really quickly refer to them. And I know that Mike Todd Jones has got an answer to one of them. There's a question from Michael Page. Following demise of the Golden Riverbank Art Project in Newnham, well, it was actually, I think, in Abbey, but anyway, there is £50,000 of the 106 funds remaining for public art projects in Cambridge, and would councillors commit to lobby for this money to be spent in North Cambridge instead? And the response to that is, thank you so much, Michael Page, for this question. One of the issues about the Section 106 money, however, is that it has to be committed to areas from which it's been raised, because it's associated with planning proposals and planning proposals that come to fruition, and developers have to make a commitment, which is the Section 106 monies. This money came up from Romsey and associated areas, and so it will have to go back to projects in those areas. However, Michael Page, rest assured that we are making real efforts to get public art in the north area of the city, particularly associated with the Milton Road project. And I know that Maureen Mace is working hard on getting funds available from other sources. Another question is from Lillian Rundblad, relating to McManus Estate. They had a fantastic project there where they did walkabouts with councillors and officers to ensure that we all looked at what was happening in the area, whether there were footpaths that needed to be fixed, whether there were trees that needed to be attended to, and so on. And carriageways have been resurfaced throughout the McManus estate, but there's been nothing done with the maintenance of pavement. So Lillian Runblad is drawing that to our attention, and what the Histon Road Area Residents Association would like is that these annual walkabouts with city and county councillors and officers be reinstated as soon as possible to identify pavements on the McManus estate which need upgrading to improve safety. And I see that our county councillor for Arbury, Councillor Hilary Cox-Condren, will respond to that one. Thank you, Hilary.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Well, I was just going to say that have the opportunity to walk through Arbury with our highways officer. Sorry, my dog's on my lap barking. Yeah, more than once a year, and we'll certainly go. You know, I'll book that in and go there shortly. We could do that, and it would be lovely if any other councillors.
Good. Yeah, because it's a lovely walk, and I mean they're so active. It's fantastic what happens in the McManus estate. Well, now there's another question, and this one is Alison Wilson from the Histon Road Residents Area.
Chair, sorry, very quickly, can I just add to what
Councillor
Cox-Condren? Yeah, it was just to say that complementing what Councillor Cox-Condren has just said, then I'm already sort of trying to organise a walkabout around the McManus, which will include obviously Councillor Cox-Condren, hopefully the local highways officer, and also an officer from the City Council Streets and Open Spaces team. So we can look at a variety of issues, and the plan is to organise that in January, probably at the weekend, depending on the availability of officers. So just to say that that's kind of in hand, and I'll liaise with Histon Road Area Residents Association and Arbury councillors in that regard. So thanks.
Oh, thanks, Councillor Todd Jones. Sorry, I didn't see your hand, and I see that Councillor Shield would like to express his enthusiasm for walking about McManus Estate too.
Just very quickly on this item, and thank you, County Councillor Cox-Condren. I'd love to join one of the walkarounds, and must mention that there are some little cut-throughs which could easily get overlooked. Two in particular I must put on record as needing our attention, our combined attention, and I've done walking there with my mother, who, as you know, has restricted mobility at the moment, and we've both commented on very severely uneven pavements in the cut-throughs, and the two are from Tavistock Road coming through to Fontwell. And by the way, Fontwell has many older residents with mobility issues, so it's relevant. I'm not just saying this on behalf of my mother, although it is for her as well. And the other one, so that cut through from Tavistock to Fontwell really needs our attention. And then the other one is at the end of Badminton Close that leads through to Lexington and Belmore. Again, it's a walkway only, so it's no vehicles, just purely a walkway for pedestrians, bikes and scooters, and the lumpiness is really, really scary. And I don't want to be melodramatic about it, but I promise you the one going from Tavistock to Fontwell, my mum was really toppling around and struggling because of the lumpiness there. And so I'd be so grateful if we could give those two cut throughs our combined attention. And I'm not just asking for selfish reasons. I do know that there are quite a lot of senior citizens living in those areas, especially the Fontwell one, but also Badminton as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shield. And I actually must return, though I doubt really whether it's wise, to the Golden River Bank Art Project. I did hear a gasp when I queried whether it was actually in Newnham, and I do need to correct myself. I stand corrected, as I have been in the chat. The project was to go ahead in Newnham, but it is not to go ahead in Newnham or anywhere else. So I do apologise for my error. in attributing it not to Newnham but to somewhere else in Cambridge. And now to the final question. This is on behalf of, to be read out on behalf of Alison Wilson of Histon Road Area Residents Association. This question concerns the audit of the Histon Road project, which the Histon Road Area Residents Association understands is now complete. In a letter of January the 31st of 2022 to the County Council Highways and Transport Committee, a group of local residents outlined items of specification which the Residents Association considered dangerous. These concerns were deferred because the audit was in progress. There has, however, been no adequate reply to the original letter. Therefore, the Histon Road Area Residents Association would like to know when the audit will be published and whether the concerns of the Residents Association are addressed in it. And I'll hand that question over to Councillor Todd Jones, who is the chair of the Histon Road Local Liaison Forum that was instrumental in having the Histon Road project go ahead in the positive way it did. So over to you, Councillor Todd Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And we have got a response from the project officer for the Histon Road scheme, Paul Vanderbalk. And basically it reads that the designers are currently putting together their design response to the Stage 3 road safety audit that was undertaken by the County Council road safety officers in the summer. And this follows standard procedure when completing a highways project such as Histon Road. The Greater Cambridge Partnership will work with the designers to pull together a mitigation plan for any aspects where this is required. The aim is for this plan to be agreed by the new year so that any outstanding works may be completed as soon as possible. And the Greater Cambridge Partnership will publicise the remedial actions that are agreed through this process in advance of any works taking place. So that's basically the answer from the project officer for Histon Road, and I believe some details about some of the work that's concerned will be provided to Alison Wilson and the Histon Road Area Residents Association. So I hope that's sort of satisfactory for now, and we'll take that further. Thanks very much.
Good. Thanks so much, Councillor Todd Jones. And so on each of those questions, we will provide the questioners, Michael Page, Lillian Rudbland, and Alison Wilson, was it? Yes. Anyway, we'll provide you with written answers that are complete and full in the terms that are able to be provided. And so the last item on the agenda is the action sheet, which is updated every time we have North Area Committee, and therefore anybody who's still with us can accept that the action log has been updated and will appear in that form on the website. So it just remains to me to say thank you so much, everybody, for sticking with us until this late hour of 9:40 p.m. And I must say thank you very much to the officers for remaining with us all this time and for ensuring that we were able to stay on board until this very late hour. So thank you very much. And this concludes North Area Committee for this date, the 17th of November 2022. Thank you.
Thank you.